I just want to welcome everybody who's joining us again or new to today. This marks the second day for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation and Tribal Historic Preservation Program listening session. Um, for today, I'll be moving you through the agenda. I'm Stacy Cutbank. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the United Nations and also the TPO coordinator for the DOT. Today we have Marvin DeFoe. He will be doing the invocation. He's a member of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. And for the past 4 years, Marvin has been the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Red Cliff. And for the past 2 years, he has served as Red Cliff Tribal Council member. He has worked for the Red Cliff tribe in many facets over the last 35 plus years. And he is also a birch bark canoe builder and a birch bark artist. So I'm very pleased to welcome Marvin DeFoe, who is doing the invocation.
Oh, buju kakena nishina bidok minawat mokumano ma. Pegisho pegisho dapanano o sema, bangi sema ma. Shigwe benes minawat kwedini ganeka borders nakas. Gete na me do dem. Na minawa o. Wabanun money do, Jawanun money do, Nagabian money do, Kiwedinu money do, Mema Dapna, Bangi Sema, O Minoa, Akikang, Minoa, the big kong, money do, and Mema Dapna, O Sema, Ma, a Pegisho, Dukoa, guys, Bakuma, Nongum, O na, Minoa, a Wishawok, Matiok, Mashkikiok. Bema dapanana o sema na minua o mikanak nagana said mikanak manido a pegisho o mikanak minua gagi gidoin udukwa gagi gidoin o guys way bakumano na minua o ispiming manido gisis manido debukat gisis manido bema dapanana o sema o na minua o Anishinaabe Gishiku Nagana Jet and Bema Dapanana o Sema na Minua o Quaida no money do Wayno Buju this Nakaso give so much that Minua Gishime Maingan money do and Bema Dapanana o Sema na Minua o Minua o Kakina money do Kakina money do Wadukua o Abanuji Minua Oski nini work Oski Ikwe work Minua nini work Minua Ikwe work Minua Mindimuye work Minua Akwenzi work Pegisho Dukwa Dapanano Sema na Minua Gete Nishinabe Minua Gete Nishinabe Binigin Bizindano o guys way bakoma gete nishnade na minowa pegisho minowa odukwa o bakena bizindano ma minowa bamari win minowa zungizi win minowa bazani ewan misa manik gagi giduwen miyo that now say in English a little bit I humbly am honored to give this talk this morning. And usually you'll find in indigenous country, and there's some of us that will open up with a Thanksgiving or open up with a prayer, or either it's a conference or meeting or something special going on. We we always give thanks, and that's what Tahasi said yesterday in his opening. Gave thanks that it's our belief too that all of creation comes before we do. It's kind of like we're the last one on the scale. And I've been to a lot of ceremonies with elders, And my formal education, I went to what I call Anishinaabe school, where it's in our teachings where you want to know something, you go to elder and you ask them something. So I consider some of the elders my private professors giving teachings, but what I'm sharing with you is those teachings, and in my prayer this morning, that's what we're taught to do. To always, there's one word that I hear all the time in our language. It's miigwech. That means thank you. That's a very powerful word. That's a very powerful word to say thank you. And that's what I did this morning. And give thanks. Give thanks to the creation. And it's even a powerful word to each other is to say say thank you once in a while, to be kind, to be compassionate, to respect each other. And my talk, that's what I said in my talk. To acknowledge Nakanamoa, you acknowledge you acknowledge those things, and you acknowledge our culture. And a lot of people think our culture went away. Well, eh, our culture begins every day when the sun comes up. Every day when that sun comes up, that's part of our culture. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're indigenous or not. That's part of all of our culture. And some people may have a little more detailed knowledge of that. But I look at it like this: that sun comes up, then it comes up at high noon, at high noon. And one of our teachings is from the morning to noon, you give all your thanks. You give all your thanks, and that sun, it will stop for a little bit to listen. All that time it listens, and it's a messenger. It gives that, and then it goes down to the west. That's where it goes. And there's another sun that comes up, and that's the nighttime sun. That's the moon, the moon that comes up. So we're always watched over, and in our teaching, that moon is we call it grandmother. It's with the ladies. It's with the ladies. It's a very connected with the ladies, and that's what I said in my talk. My talk here, the Ikwewog, the Mindimuyog, Mindimui, the lady. That's a elder lady. And in our language, Mindimuyog, it doesn't mean lady, or it doesn't mean old lady. It doesn't mean that. It means it's a woman that keeps our family together. That's the translation, that keeps that family together. And then in my talk, I said, Akwenzi. Somebody said, oh, what does Akwenzi mean? Well, old man. No, that don't mean old man. I mean, Aki is the earth. That's a person that has walked the earth um, many times more steps than we did. That's what that means. Somebody who's really walked the earth. And I also I prayed for our ancestors. I prayed for our ancestors, and I invited them to our meeting today. I invited them. It's our belief that that it's our belief that life goes on when you're no longer on this earth. It continues on. Some people call it spirit, some people call it energy, or what have you, but that keeps going on, and our ancestors will continue teaching us continue teaching us, giving us knowledge, giving us um, insight, or guiding us, or whatever. And and I kept seeing our ancestors this morning. I kept seeing them. And I wanted to acknowledge, our ancestors, because of the work that we're doing in this conference certainly has a lot to do with our ancestors. It has a lot to do with the footprint of indigenous people on this earth. A lot to do with our ancestors. And I said yesterday, certainly, some of our ancestors wasn't too kind, but again, I learned something yesterday too. Is moving forward, let's be kind ourselves now. We can change that. We can moving forward. We can work together, collaborate together, so that we can be very respectful, be very kind, kind to each other, and walk forward in a good way. Walk forward in a good way, and we're kind of at a place where we can correct those wrongs. You know, we can correct them. We can do it. We can do the right thing. So in my talk this morning and our prayer this morning, I wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm saying it in English here now, but I said in Ojibwe, in our language, with that to start us off in a good way. And we had a good day yesterday, and we're going to have a good day today. And that's why I look at that. Our, we work in the seasons. Right now it's Zigwan Bibun. We're getting ready for summer. Summer's coming. And I look at that sun every day when it comes out. It's almost like a page in a book, you know. It's like and it turns automatically. Tomorrow there'll be another page in that book. 3 days from now there'll be another page in that book. So so that's how I look at it. And that is our culture. You know, the moon is our culture. The sun, the stars, the land, the earth, the water, and what's in the ground. Our ancestors that are put in the ground. That's our culture. And and most indigenous people, most, not everyone, but most, were connected connected to that culture, or to that land. You know, if you get up in the morning, you greet that sunrise. You're connecting to your culture. And I want to say one last thing. One last thing is that I want to acknowledge all the non-indigenous people here too at this conference. I'm not saying that, well, because I'm a Chippewa, I'm indigenous. I know all there is to know about spirituality, or praying, or the culture. But I think all people have a connection to the earth. No matter what, no matter where. And some people call that universal truth. Universal truth. You know, and we all. You think through time. You think through the ages. I started off about Red Cliff was one time, and there 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, when we all lived on this earth, all lived on the land. All people had a connection to the earth, to the land. In my language, I just call it a little different. The Oneidas, they call it a little different. You go to I know, in fact, I know some traditional German people over in Germany. Holy crap, they were just like indigenous people. They were really connected to that land. I visited an old man over there. He had medicines up in his in jars, and in fact, he even had a little drum. And he said that's how our people used to be, you know. Anyway, going on and on, I just wanted to acknowledge. I wanted to acknowledge not just our indigenous culture, but I want to acknowledge everyone's. Everyone here that has a connection to the land, because I know we're Tippo, and I know we look at a lot of historical things, historical things in the past, and so that we can protect that. But I also believe that we need to protect the future too. Protect the future. And all of us are at a crossroads, no matter who we are, with with protecting the future for the 7 generations coming ahead. So we can learn. I think it's part of our job too to learn from the past, and we're here present right now with that page turning with the sun to protect to think about the 7 generations in the future up ahead also. But I wanted to share that much, and I'm so thankful for everybody participating here at the conference. Like I said, we had a good day yesterday, and I'm wishing with these blessings to have a good day today. Miigwech, and thank you. I'm done. I'll quit talking. My 15 minutes are up. No.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you for that heartfelt introduction. Invocation. Right now, we're moving on to the next item in the agenda, and that is with Samantha Skenador, and that's Section 106 in Historic Preservation Act. Samantha is Ho-Chunk and Oneida and is an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. She is an attorney in the Indian Law and Policy Practice Group in Quarles and Brady's Madison, Wisconsin office. Samantha's extensive multi-jurisdictional practice includes both federal Indian law and tribal law. For more than 22 years, Samantha has worked within the tribal cultural resources arena by preserving or reacquiring tribal ancestral sites and land, assisting in the implementation and compliance of the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act, drafting tribal historic preservation codes and policies, and participating in the Section 106 consultation process of the National Historic Preservation Act. Today, Samantha will be presenting on Section 106 in the Historic Preservation Act. And please welcome Samantha Skenador.
Hey, thank you, Stacy, for the nice introduction. And Marvin, thank you for those really kind and moving words this morning. I was really appreciative of what you had said and the content and the manner that you said those words for everybody. And I share in those feelings. And I hope this presentation definitely is in the spirit of those words to help us all be considerate and kind to each other about what we are working towards here for preservation. And also, some things that I can contribute just from experience to you. This presentation is also to include questions and answers. So this is not, a stoic institutional presentation to you. It is meant to be a fluid presentation. Just what Marvin had said, we have different experiences in the process. My experience is quite broad. I have worked in Section 106 since the mid-90s, not just for the tribe that I'm enrolled with at Ho-Chunk, but for dozens of other tribes throughout the country. We've worked with a multitude of agencies from the law firm perspective. We've done everything from starting up repositories for our tribal clients, all the way through complex, large-scale, high-profile 106 projects with agency actions throughout different administrations. So the perspective that I share from you is broad, and the points that I make are from a technical perspective as legal counsel to tribes. Some of the things that I've seen and learned along the way. This is essentially my tool belt. This is what I carry with me and offer to my clients, and advice and counsel and considerations along the way to help them make really good decisions and help them make sure the decisions they make are going to move the tribe forward, are going to protect the sites the way they want them to be protected, and also get them in a better position for the next project, because these projects just keep coming. So that's the counsel that I've learned to help craft for our clients, and this is what I hope to share with this group. This is what I understand WisDOT Historic Preservation listening session would be most useful for folks to hear. So I'll go ahead and click to the next slide. I think everybody here, and I apologize for missing yesterday's listening session. It sounded like it went very well, and it was met all of its goals. So I hope that this morning's session, particularly my session, is an extension of those good feelings and good discussions going forward. For the NHPA, everybody I think on this call knows what the NHPA is and what it does. I just want to make some references to the law. Of course, I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't tell you where authority lies within the THPO offices and the officers. That really sets the framework for the strategies and the tactics that I'm about to present to you today. We all know that the Act certainly brings tribes to the table. It's an expression of that federal trust responsibility that the United States has with tribes. It was amended in 1992, and the 92 amendments were the ones that really frame out the THPO offices, the authorities, and the broad catch that tribes now have to endure. Tribes historically have had, a traditional cultural historic preservation office in some way, shape, or form, whether that was an elders council back in the day, still is today, perhaps. Some of my clients still do have elders councils, and they do not proceed with anything on the 106 level without elders council. Other tribes certainly have, full-fledged THPO offices, multiple staff, sometimes outside consultants. So there is a broad range of resources that tribes employ to carry out their authorities and express their sovereignty, and certainly work government to government with the federal government to protect their land, their cultural resources, their ancestral remains, and certainly have a seat at the table on projects that affect them. So I want to just, again, and we don't need to go through this in detail, but the 92 amendments set forth this A through E framework. This is the underpinning of THPO offices. So this is really, Section 110 really lays out, the direction of the Act that's specific to these offices. There are benchmarks in here. There are citations to the Advisory Council, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, F2 is in here. If there are things in here you have not looked into, there are guidelines and resources available, and I'll make some points along the way. But this area of the Act really is always under constant growth, always under constant improvements. While 92 is a long ways away, we are still developing the guidelines under these 92 editions, and there is a lot to come in the very near future, which is one of the points in this presentation. So under 101 D2, that's the portion of the Act that creates those THPO programs. And the THPO, the role of the THPO office, as most of you likely know, if you are either a THPO or you've had to call upon your THPO, or you work across the table from a THPO, you know that these folks are looking specifically at traditional cultural properties. They are looking for whether these TCPs are eligible for inclusion in the National Register. Those have to be rooted in the history of the community. So tribes that are identifying those sites know that they have certain measures and criteria to meet. They also have to be important in maintaining the continuity of that community's traditional beliefs and practices. So how that tribe, the story of that tribe, whether it's oral history or the current story of how that tribe is tied and finds significance with those cultural sites. That is the story that needs to be told in the process. And how you tell that story is of great importance for the outcomes. Again, the role of the TPO is a part of the tribe's exercise of tribal sovereignty. And TPOs are actually people that go above and beyond the call of duty. I mean, even just listening to my good relative Marvin Defoe earlier, you can tell that he is very cognizant of what other tribes and nations are doing with their historic preservation practices, and how they may use different words and different phrases and have, you know, a variety of meanings on how they attach and describe these special places and these special resources. They are broad. Those are broad connotations to the language of cultural resources, and likely everybody in this room or in this training session knows the variety of words and phrases that can go along with describing these places and these things. So this TPO officer is, quite honestly to me, always the gatekeeper of this information. That is an important role of this office. And again, it may be one person, it may be more than one person. And a lot of this knowledge, this institutional knowledge of this expertise is somewhere up in somebody's brain, right? It's not always on paper and it's not always organized in a really nice bulleted point outline. This information is critical, it's essential, it's the guts and glory of any tribe. And it often, again, lies in somebody's brain and in their heart. And so looking at that from that perspective of how precious that information is, and that it also lies within the elders of that tribe and other people within the tribe, you know, collecting and using that data against this rubric of this act is really the secret sauce in all the beauty of a TPO office. And it's a very difficult job. Every TPO I know, and if I'm hired to do one project, I always recognize and I'm cognizant that TPO is doing dozens of other projects at the same time. So there's never one 106 project that they are doing. And I think that's the first misconception from the agency perspective. States seem to understand this better than federal agencies, but some agencies think because they're in a 106 with the tribe that this is the only 106 that tribe is doing. So they should be committed to, you know, the game plan, the timeline, and the project deadlines for this particular 106 project, when in fact that TPO may be involved in numerous other projects, including other 106 consultations, or all of the other things that are expected from the TPO office. And talking about that, I'm sure folks that have maybe participated in NATHPO, the National Historic Preservation Officer, National Association of Historic Preservation Officers, sorry, get my acronyms messed up here, that we learn that TPOs do almost anything and everything. They assist with infrastructural projects. They do comprehensive planning and development. They chime in on the tribe's preservation plans or any big projects the tribe might have, any capital projects. They are intrinsically tied with the tribe's language program and resources. They work on tourism, cultural tourism. You'll see them at different cultural events, different significant political events. They are also a huge factor in the educational arm of the tribe. They are helping with curriculum development from all levels, whether that's internal or dealing with other outside entities, whether it's K through 12 or post-secondary. These folks are busy. They're managing cemeteries for the tribes. They're coordinating burials. They're dealing with repatriation issues. They are managing technical surveys in a variety of phases. So they might be scoping a survey. They might be issuing an RFP. They might be awarding or observing compliance with the contract. They have all kinds of land management deals. Lots of tribes have land in a trust applications that are pending or being under script. And these guys are typically the ones helping steer those applications as well. These guys are also librarians. They are authenticators. They work in the political system of authenticating data, ethnographies, PhD dissertations, all of those things that involve studying, analyzing, and assessing the tribe's cultural well-being. So there are so many things that a TPO does. And I think the first thing, if there's ever any point of order in talking about how to give some strategies, and talk about what's out there in Section 106. I think the most important thing is to recognize what a TPO is and all of the things that they do for the tribe. So it is all encompassing. And I think even just going through that list, and that's not a comprehensive list, those are just some examples. I think, we almost need a sip of coffee just to take that all in. So thank you, TPOs, for all that you do for Indian country, for the state, for the national policy on preservation, all the things you carry out. That's very much appreciated. So one thing that I was asked to cover for TPO offices is preparations and tactics. It seems kind of awkward, and I think it's almost a little funny, is, the keepers of all of this knowledge, this traditional knowledge, and the keepers of the strategy and the voice of the tribe oftentimes, how do you even prepare them for what they often refer to themselves as the battle ahead? So they often have many little wars and battles ahead of them that are constantly coming, sometimes without notice. And how do you prepare them for these difficult challenges? And I think before I say that, I think one thing in the spirit of what Marvin had said earlier is that, it's a very difficult job to do. And these changes and the things you do and how you do them really matter. Like flipping through the pages of a book, like he mentioned today, this page today is just one page. And it can and often does reflect what's written on the pages of tomorrow, the day after, the week after, the year after. And the reality of it all is, as my dad says, the most important thing that you ever need to be cognizant of, it is timing. Where are you in this given point of time right now? And what do you do with that? Because it does set the stage for what's to come. So in that light, I have learned there have been, and have been in this area long enough to know that change is inevitable. And these TPOs will come and go, and their services will come and go. Tribal leadership will come and go. Federal agencies definitely come and go every 5 seconds. States a little more consistent, I'd have to say, in experience. But everything's changing all the time. And if the TPO office really works to stabilize itself in anticipation for change, these are some of the preparations and tactics that I hope to share. These are things where quite honestly, some clients have gone very wrong and have made mistakes or just lacked resources to really get their TPO office up and running, strong, growing, and in a right direction. I think of a TPO office, quite honestly, from a business perspective. A TPO office is essentially a small business. It has a budget, it has a leader, it has goals and a mission, it has compliance issues, has reporting issues, and all of the things that it does in terms of form and function really do set the stage for the tribe politically, legally, and in terms of cultural preservation. It really sets the stage for the well-being of the tribe. So thinking of it in terms of a business sense and a business office, what is the business of the office? And again, we look back at the Act and Section 110, we look at some of the guidelines, and I want to stress the difference between the law and the guidelines is really important. Guidelines are just helpful pieces that you can reference or look at for support. Certainly, tribes are nations, and if we know anything about nation building and tribal sovereignty, we know that you need to do what's best for you. And oftentimes what's best for you comes from your tribe's history in dealing with these things. I think it's important to also recognize that tribes are not a new phenomenon. Tribes have been around for thousands of years. So that matters. Why does that matter when it comes to historic preservation? It matters because tribes have been international players for a really long time, longer than the United States. They outlived the National Historic Preservation Act. They have international commerce, they have international relations, international treaties, often oral, that still actually play out in today's world. They have an amazing amount of experience in international diplomacy. So saying that, those skill sets and that knowledge is still often well intact within different tribal nations. And so setting up this business office of sorts, it seems to be best practices for the offices to reach back into their own tribal history on diplomacy, international relations, and safeguarding of cultural resources. That whole body of traditions and customs within that tribe really sets the tone for what the TPO office can and should look like. And I say should because, that's what's unique about that particular tribe. That's how the rest of the tribe that is their comfort level, that's their knowledge level, that's their trust level, and that's how they are traditionally doing things within that nation. So how do you build that office from that traditional knowledge, that institutional knowledge that your tribe has? How do you build that into a highly functional, form and function efficient space? The reality of working in a TPO office, and I worked myself personally in the Cultural Resources Office for over 4 years. I understand what it's like to get sometimes as many as 7 or more letters a day, providing that tribe notice that a project is coming your way. Whether that's a Section 106 project or it's some other project that involves some sort of consultation to you, the tribe, those notices and those onsets of projects, they just keep coming, and there are dozens of them that come in every single week. And looking at how those come in, how do you respond to them? What is your triage? How do you handle drinking from the fire hose when everybody around you wants to impact your land, your resources, and your people? How are you constantly going to answer, respond, and play the game that is required by law, and really support the tribe's initiatives for cultural resources? Some of the things that we've talked about here involve really building up that office to be able to drink from that fire hose as best they can. So some of the shortcomings that I've noticed are some things where some attention is needed is really just taking a look at the TPO office from a business perspective and looking at it in terms of investing in the TPO office. I know a lot of TPO offices have gone to tribal council or through the administrative process, asked for more help. Maybe they've applied for a grant. Maybe they've done some collaborative efforts with other tribes to try to work on archives, repository building, those sorts of things. But these things are very important because this is what is in that TPO's tool belt. This is number one. This is their go-to all day long, where they go to for knowledge and information. So my first recommendation for preparations and tactics involves investing in that office. My number one thing is always building the repository. I have personally traveled all the way from Massachusetts to California, and I've rolled up my button-down shirt sleeves and I've dug into tribal archives all over the country. And I can tell you, repositories across the table are on one polar end and another. Some are very, very, very well done. I mean, white gloves, white boxes, highly organized, digitized, ready to go. And some are just a small collection of antiquities of sorts, and some documents from tribal elders or just some donations of things. Some are just starting. So rolling up the sleeves to really find this repository data and get it organized and accessible for that TPO is really a crucial first step. Right now, tribes are doing some very interesting things. They are dealing with some nuances in curation, dealing with space issues, using technology. They are also making regular and meaningful reach outs to the community. So some tribes are having like a cultural resources or a repository community-led meetings within the tribal community. And in those meetings, maybe their elder councils facilitating, and they are just letting tribal members know, could we make copies of the documents you have? Any items that you would like to donate to our museum or curation, you can do that. If there are things you might want to lend to us for some reasons, we can do that. If you'd like to participate in elder interviews, we're going to have them on these days, and we'll be able to give an elder stipend of this much money. So really just promoting a reciprocal relationship within the community to build the repository is a very constant and regular. We do see a lot of good things from those clients that are doing these on a constant and regular basis. The other part is your TPO website. And I'd like to say folks on this call may have looked at their own website recently, and some may have not looked at it for months or years. And some, are looking at other tribes all the time to say, okay, what do they think is consumable data? And as lawyers, we call it consumable data. What do we want out there? What is okay to be out there? And sometimes you may need to get approvals for things that you put out there. For example, some tribes almost have their entire, archive and repository out on a website. Some require some sort of logins, but really, what is consumable to the tribe? And those are some soul searching questions that, clients would need to do. But also really, sometimes you can avoid the loss of time of picking up the phone or getting inquiries if some of your data that is consumable is already out on your website or is linked to your website. So it may not be you, it may be Department of Education, or it may be the language office. But if you link consumable data on your website, you avoid a lot of time and energy on picking up calls, not just to agency people and other folks, but also to tribal members. You also empower them with some data that would be helpful for whatever they might need data for. The other big thing I think that is sorely missed, and I wish there was just one resource that just went out after all of these grants for historic preservation and cultural resources, is going out and getting money. Tribes never, ever, I have never seen a tribal government fund a TPO office or a cultural resources historic preservation office to the amount that they need. I've never seen that. And it sounds like a regular government problem. It is running rampant in Indian country, where when we look back a couple slides ago and we see what TPOs do, and then you realize that they are severely underfunded, sometimes at 50%, sometimes only at 25% of their budget needs. You really, it makes you feel a little sick inside when you don't have enough money to answer all those letters that come in or even open them sometimes. So really, resources are a big sore spot for TPO offices. I always try to make a plug with tribal councils as clients to say, how are you feeding your cultural resources? Those folks need support. It takes time and energy to do what they do. And one thing I want to throw out there, and not just because I'm a hired hand, but just because I've also looked at other contracts that go into tribes for cultural resources and historic preservation, even grant writing, sometimes the outside expertise is affordable. And sometimes it's cheaper than hiring a human being sitting in the office. And I know tribes constantly have this need for labor and trying to hire their own folks. And sometimes the budget just doesn't cover that. So I throw out there the option C is maybe consider a low budget contractor to come in and get out and do XYZ for you, whatever that is, whether it's building your repository, digitizing it, conducting elder interviews, writing grants, whatever it is that office needs, maybe consider outside resources. Sometimes there are also what I'm seeing with some of the more sophisticated administrative process type tribes, those tribes that really focus on administrative processes, is that they have refined, efficient ways of doing things. Some tribes, and I don't know if there may even be tribes or TPOs in this training that can share a little bit of how they've made their administrative processes. How do they take in notice of a project to the point where the project's done and over with? What all happens in there? Who are the players? How fast does it go? How are you able to keep up with all of those movements with limited resources? So those are more roundtable sharing discussions about how do you refine administrative process? How do you share some of those best practices and what you've learned? And finally, the ultimate question, which we can discuss later on in questions and answers, is what is it exactly does your office need? Every office might need the same thing. Some offices may need other things. It really comes down to need-based discussions and collaboration. Finally, the second thing I've noticed that seems to also hinder the performance of a TPO office is public relations. TPOs automatically, in my perspective, in my experience of working on the outside, when somebody says TPO, the federal ears perk up, the Department of Interior and all their staff perk up, the ACHP perks up, the state players perk up. The TPO is a very important person for all the reasons we've already talked about. So they automatically have some, grandstanding abilities already, just inherently because people know when you say TPO that person has a certain level of authority and that person has a certain level of knowledge, and that certain person has a lot of support from that tribal community. So when you say TPO, it rings of, we better listen, and we want to learn. This person is the person, he's the decision maker. The tribe will often defer to what this person says. So we need to pay attention. But likewise, the TPO only gets a status and maintains that status when he or she engages, or they engages in active public relations campaigns. There are times when a TPO, when that power of knowledge and authority, I won't say used and abused, but I'll say isn't asserted enough, or the tribe is unaware of what a TPO does. A lot of tribal council members, you'll notice, we're always in that age where we have younger tribal council members, folks that have not been paying attention to the 1990s of NAGPRA and the 1992 here with the National Historic Preservation Act, and then all of the different projects and how the outcome has affected the tribe. Those new council members are not in the know of the last 30 years of historic preservation causes. Therefore, they're not in the know of what their TPO officer does or doesn't do. One of the things the TPO officer in my best practices suggestions is to public relate. Go ahead and improve your relationships with the governing body. However, which way you do that, certainly you can get some tips and ideas from previous administrations or even from previous TPOs, but also improve with the administration. Your budgets, and I always go to budgets. Budgets they only go through the administrative process, and the way that you are viewed to that administration will matter when it comes to budget decisions. So keeping those relationships strong within the administration is very important to do. Inviting your administration to a Section 106 consultations to see you work. Have them come to your presentations, such as this. Have them come to other NATHPO things. If you involve your tribe, just one person here and there, into what it is in the day in the life of a TPO, that pumps up your TPO relationship. The other thing I think we're doing right now is networking, right? We're talking with other industry people that have differing perspectives. I certainly have a differing perspective than a tribal leader right now. I have a different perspective from a TPO in northern Wisconsin. I may have a differing perspective of a federal agency lead. And so these networking of the industry and getting inside the vision, the best practices, and the trends that are happening in your industry right now, the only way you're going to do that is to get out there and be part of it, go in and listen, contribute, collaborate. And these are ongoing. There's no end in sight. These things are changing. Next year, if I was to give the same presentation, you might see a lot of different slides here. So things change that quickly. NATHPO is a great resource. Again, NATHPO is only as good as its members. Any organization that you affiliate with, they are only as good as their members. So if you're not a member and you're not contributing, then that organization is not as strong as it could be. Likewise, your colleagues, you need to encourage your colleagues to be involved in NATHPO too, because NATHPO, again, is only as strong as its membership and its leadership. Also, the local and state historic preservation agencies and offices and organizations, same thing with them. I think in Wisconsin, just so you know, across my board of practice, Wisconsin is, and I don't know if it's because I'm biased, but I tend to think of it more of a leadership model when it comes to government between the state and the sat through many Wisconsin state agencies and offices and decision-making bodies, administrative bodies. I can say that there is so much more strength and understanding and knowledge between the state actors in Wisconsin and the tribes than most states. So in fact, a lot of my clients from different states ask, well, how does Wisconsin do this? And then they sit back and say, that's insane. That they would never do that in the state. Our state liaisons would never do something like that. So there's different phases. States are all in different places. And I have to say, Wisconsin tends to be a better model state, which is great because generations of TPOs before you and generations of agency officials before you, whoever's on this call, they have invested in this strengthening aspect. And that's why you're here today. And that's why we're able to say that today. And that means we can take it certainly to another level going forward. So more preparations and tactics. One thing I think that goes amiss in TPO offices is the need, they do need technical institutional knowledge at their fingertips. So TPOs are not lawyers, right? TPOs are not lawyers. They are not elected government body officials. And they are also not, institutional federal agencies that have for the most part, well-organized institutional knowledge inside their tool belts. But they should. My point here is they should. They should have all of the PAs they've ever engaged in 106 at their fingertips. They should have all the MOAs. They should also look at their confidentiality agreements. They should send them up to their tribal law offices and say, hey, should we update these? What needs updating here? This is what we have on the horizon. Work with your legal staff that you have to really get those updated and available and ready at your fingertips to grab. Don't wait till you're in the middle of, a consultation and, you might not have that resources readily available. Any TCP studies that have been done on or near your land, you should make sure you keep those. You may need to cite to those. You may need to distinguish a new project from those. You may need to build off of those. You may need to rehire that consultant if they were qualified. You may need to know why that consultant who did that TCP study was not qualified and why you need to go get somebody else. Same thing with archaeological studies. Maybe it's confidential. These maybe the only place you can find it is in your archives. And if you are gone tomorrow, Mr. THPO, is your next person going to be able to find that study and be able to rely on that knowledge, or is that knowledge reliable for you to take that to elders and expand on that knowledge for any particular project? These are institutional tools that should be in your toolkit that you can pull upon. And we'll get to CBAs in a minute, community benefits agreements. Those are more modern versions of things. But the other thing I want to point out to folks on the call is that as we've been moving more and more since 1992 with these offices, THPO offices, and these applicants that tend to stay the same, doing the same similar projects and the same footprints of the same tribes, there has been a movement towards developing corporate policies. And so if you're not aware of any applicant's corporate policies on working with you as a tribe or Indigenous people generally, I would say ask. There might be one, and it might have been around a lot longer than you might not have known. So ask for a copy of that. Put that in your toolkit here. Make sure you know what that corporate policy is. And if you work with company X next year, ask them if the corporate policy changed. What's your corporate policy? Who in the company is in charge of carrying out and enforcing this corporate policy? And this also goes to UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. You have to remember that corporate America is a slippery beast. They are not always easy to find. They are not always a Wisconsin LLC that you can look up on the Secretary of Wisconsin's website. So it's important to understand that there are corporate policies, and one of the easiest things to do from a legal strategy is hold people accountable against their own strategies. That tends to be an easy way of avoiding problems down the road. So how can you do that if you don't know what it is? And again, corporate policies are now running all over the place. If there are companies, for example, that are their home state of their origin where they were incorporated is a signatory to the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, then you want to make sure you hold the feet to the fire and say, hey, company X, you're from X country and you guys signed the declaration. We understand then that you have an obligation to us as Tribe Z to follow all of these different articles within the declaration. And that is also, another layer on top of consultation that you can work directly with the corporate body on. So that is some other tactics to consider, is don't just think narrowly here in Wisconsin, local company. Think about who their investors are. Think about where that company is incorporated at, and think about whether they have participated or that country has signed on to that declaration, and then think about your strategy going forward. So how do you get all of these things? How do you get all of these things? And again, that means you have to internally do some soul searching on your own records. Like, is your record keeping policy up to date? Do you know what it is? Where do you find these boxes? Do you have a good relationship with your records manager at the tribe? So your own online resources, and of course your ability to research within that repository. Also, there are some abilities to go to a tribe. Sometimes tribes that are very vested in a project will create their own project website. Sometimes the applicant will create its own project website, and you can find all of the documents on there and timetables. So make sure you just know where everything is. ACHP may have some resources and some other guidelines and similar projects, case studies that mirror what project you're working on now. And maybe it's helpful to download that, reference it, have it at your fingertips when you're sitting in consultation, so you can talk to the agency, talk to the applicant, talk to the other players in the consultation about that guidelines. Maybe we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. Maybe, this project in, New Hampshire is very similar, and we could look at what they did. So that's some ideas about where to go looking online. Certainly, again, your NATHPO comes in handy when you're collaborating with your colleagues in the industry. You learn a lot. So network within the other TPOs. If you don't go to NATHPO, you typically know the same players from the same TPO offices. But again, they change every so often. And sometimes if there's a project that looks very similar, smells very similar, or includes like an applicant that you're already dealing with, I tell clients all the time, just pick up the phone. And sometimes I pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm representing, Tribe Z, and we have the same kind of problem with the same applicant. How did things go for you in 106? I have never not had a phone call back. I've never not had somebody send me a document from consultation and share that with me. So if you have any problems with cold contacts, I would be pretty surprised, but you may be able to find something similar out there that would be helpful as a reference to arm you and get you ready for consultation. Finally, very important is the who in the whole process. The who, there's lots of players in 106, and sometimes we end up, talking to only a couple of players throughout the process. In fact, that was probably one of my biggest mistakes in working in 106 early on, is I talked to the friendliest people that understood and listened to me the most. As I grew into this industry, I learned that those aren't the people I need to talk to. The people I need to talk to are the ones that aren't listening, that are not maybe the friendliest, or are very new to the process. I need to spend time with them. So I've learned to identify who those people are, what their roles are, what agencies they represent, and certainly how to approach them, so that that's going to be, your poison pill of sorts if anything were to go awry in the process. So spending time with those that don't agree with you, as uncomfortable as it may seem, it tends to be a better best practices thing that I've learned over the years. Before I start due diligence, does anybody have any questions about some of the best practices and tactics that we've discussed so far? Hearing none, if you put something in the chat, maybe we can come back to that at the end for questions. I will go ahead and move forward. So we also we've also looked at and I keep a running list. This is again my toolkit for you. This is my running list of preparations and tactics. So I'm a checklist person. I literally have this list on a Microsoft Word spreadsheet. So when I get hired to do things, I check all these things off. Or I note where they are in the process, or who is the last person I spoke to, what am I waiting for, what's the date I asked for things, so that when I go and run through this list once a week or wherever it's calendared on my calendar, I know exactly where I left things off. So feel free to copy and paste this into your own list and add and edit it as you like to work with it. But due diligence is really important. And the number one thing that is the most important is, do you understand the project? Projects are sometimes very large scale. I'm working on one right now, which is the Vineyard Wind Project. It involves massive wind turbines off the coast in Massachusetts. I worked on Cape Wind before, so I dabbled in Cape Wind back in 2008, 9, and 10. And so I've had a little bit of wind farm Section 106 experience. But I tell you, every single day is a challenge. The technical part of the project they haven't done these mass scale projects out in the ocean just yet. So they are still learning what the technology can be. They're learning what the technology should be against historic preservation. And so it's all a constant learning game. So I have to keep up with these technical reviews. And even as an attorney, they can get pretty dicey. And I even need help, and I'm not afraid to ask for help. So my first advice is really know what the project is. Know what is going forward, what's to come. And if you don't understand what the project is, go get help. You can get help internally. If it's a roads project, go see your roads crew. If it's an energy project, find your energy resource people at the tribe. See who is within their trusted network that you can get some probably free advice on a project. go and get your help you need to really understand what the scope of the project is. The second part, again, is that applicant, and these are things I just discussed when it came to institutional knowledge. Get familiar with this applicant. I'm not saying get familiar with them so that you sue them. I hope you don't have to sue them. But get familiar with where they're coming from. Sometimes they're not all bad, quite honestly. Sometimes if you get to know them, they may have, again, these corporate policies on working with Indigenous peoples. They may have signed on, they may take that duty very seriously. And you have to remember, again, the applicant is different than the federal agency lead. So what you're often being contacted with in your filter, you usually get to the applicant through the filter of the federal agency lead, which is not ever the full story. The federal agency lead doesn't always know what the position is of their applicant. They have an application for permits and for a project in front of them. And that's really all they need to care about. And of course, their duties under Section 106. But if you pass that filter of the federal agency person and you get to the corporate applicant themselves, you find out who they are, if they have these policies in place, if they have resources, have they been already trying to build a trusting relationship with the tribes, not necessarily your tribe, maybe other tribes. What have they done in Indian country? What are they trying to do? What are they investing in? And you may be pleasantly surprised that you find that there are some efforts, and some efforts have been out there for more than 10 years. And sometimes I think as tribes, we get caught in our tunnel vision within the tribal sphere, that we don't take the time to really dabble into the corporate sphere. And I myself have been pleasantly surprised working with different companies over the years and spending more time learning how these companies work and what is their commitment, what is their track record, are we going to be part of that track record, and what are we going to look like in that track record? So really piercing the veil of the tribal veil and getting into corporate America. All right, so I'm going to pick up where I left off, and this is probably one of the most out of your comfort zone recommendations that I could probably make, and we're in the due diligence section under applicant, the little bullet for applicant, about halfway down. Again, getting to know what the applicant, who they are, what their policy is with tribal nations, where their home country is, and then getting to collaborative efforts. Sometimes when you reach out to the applicant and have a sidebar, they may have already pre-thought out some collaboration efforts with you. And, if you do that reach out, sometimes you can start exploring those earlier on in the process. But I wouldn't say do that until you've actually, who you're talking to, how that company's structured, what their roles and responsibilities are. And there's also, background checks, right? Tribes always have these problems with background checks because it's hard to find out what is the credit of this applicant, what is the credit of this federal agency. And one of the things you can do is you can find out what other tribes have worked with an agency. And one way we can do that with these applicants is you can actually reach out, again, maybe a cold call to another tribe that has worked with XYZ agency. And you could say, who did you work with on this project, if it's not obviously available online, and find out how that agency rep did. And what were things that you need to be careful about moving forward through the process, again, with that same person, if that is the same person. So there's some ways you can kind of just get your handle on. These are things I do for a client as well. If I'm able to see that a certain agency I'm working with has worked with tribes before, I find out who that person is, what tribal TPOs they've worked with, what they ended up cutting a deal with so that I can let my client know, well, this applicant or this agency is open to this or this. They've done it before. We can point that out in our discussions with them. So there's all kinds of applicant things. And again, for questions and answers later, maybe we can explore some other questions to really make sure your due diligence is done on the applicant. Don't just walk in blindly and meet them and shake their hand. There's a lot of stuff you should be doing before you physically see this person. Same goes for the federal agency. All of the same things apply here. Agency folks, and this is always my biggest gripe of doing 106, is that they change all the time. I don't think I've ever seen the same agency person, even though I work for multiple tribes, sometimes within the same agency, multiple different personalities and people coming through the agency, which interpret agency guidelines differently, even within the same year. So I think, to be honest, if you're not having that experience, know that that experience is out there, that these agency people are almost always new, and they often get fired, and you don't know that either in the hindsight. Sometimes these agency people, you'll spend a year and a half, sometimes 2 years with this agency contact, only to know that they have failed miserably in their 106 duties, and the agency fired them for ever doing that in the future. So I've noticed a lot of the agency people I've worked with. Certainly, I'm probably a little bit of a thorn in the side, but I try not to be. I've learned in hindsight that these agency people are one-offers. So as much as you think you're walking in new, sometimes you are usually, as a tribal TPO, you are usually more experienced than the agency person who's actually leading the process. So keep that in mind, and really nail down what that agency is expecting of you, what they think their duties are. Really hone in on what timelines are out there. I put those in my calendars. If they say by June 30th, the 30-day, your comments are due, our findings will come out on this day, I'll put it in my calendar, in my Outlook calendar, and then I'll know if I don't see it by then, I make a phone call, right? So you just keep on track with their schedule. And as always, I always find it helpful to give people at the advisory council a phone call if things don't smell right. Just make sure I'm not, missing anything. More due diligence. Here's some more due diligence you may or may not have thought about. What about other tribes? A lot of TPOs know each other really well. They spend a lot of time together at these consultations. They become friends. They become extended family members. They invite each other to ceremonies. They really get to know each other. Families get to intermix. But that's not always the case with all tribes that are at any one table. So sometimes good due diligence is to really extend yourself with other tribes, get to know them a little bit more. Again, tribes are always changing as well. Things have changed in that tribe since maybe you were at a consultation with this tribe 5 years ago. Find out what their structure is, what has changed, who's their new TPO, and what are they going to come to the table with? What do you think your neighbors, the Menominee are going to say about this project? What do you think they're going to be concerned about? Maybe you might want to pick up the phone and call them and see if there's more things that you might want to share with them as well, and have a reciprocal preparatory call. Do your interests overlap with other interests? And find out where the overlap is, and make sure you know how to use that overlap, because again, safety in numbers. If there's more tribes saying, this site is precious, and this is our number one priority. These are our 3 big priorities. And if your priorities overlap with theirs, safety and numbers, collaborate and really make sure then you move through the identification phase, the other phases of 106 together, especially where those bullet points overlap. One other area that I've noticed is also sometimes completely absent in 106 when working for tribes is that sometimes the tribe has had zero relationship with interested parties in the process. And sometimes this baffles me. Sometimes they're local historical societies. Sometimes they are conservation organizations. Sometimes they're archaeological societies. Sometimes they're, aviary groups. Whatever the interested party is in the footprint of this ape, you will probably know about them. They'll either show their interest, or they'll already be identified, or they'll show up somewhere in the process. So somewhere along the way, things come out of the woodwork and you're like, who are these people? Who is this group? What are they doing here? So think about openly that when you collaborate, just like safety in numbers, that whole strategy, interested parties can sometimes, believe it or not, have more power and sway with that federal agency than a tribe does. And it's not, we like to think it should never work that way, but that is absolutely true. I'm working on a project now where somebody was brought in the last 1 or 2 months before the MOA was struck, and they had all the power, and they've got a CBA for a lot of money. And had we reached out to them earlier, I don't know if things would have been different. We don't know if the tribe's interest could have been incorporated in that other interested party, and we could have solved a lot of those problems through that CBA. So these are all things to think about in due diligence and strategy, is who else is out there? Why are they interested? Are they at the table now? Can we expect them to come to the table? Do we have a phone call with them? Do we align ourselves? These are all just like military tactics, what are we leaving out? And again, most of the times the tribes do not, in my experience, do not reach out or have a relationship or build trust with other interested parties. They often can and will miss out on opportunities for resolve with the project. Because their only resolve they're focused on is what the agency resolve is. But the agency resolve is only the agency resolve. The applicant can do other resolutions through things like CBAs or other agreements that can resolve some of those concerns the tribes have. But they have to either have that relationship with the applicant directly, or they have to have an allegiance with other tribes, or they have to have an allegiance with other interested parties. If they don't have all of those things together, the odds of them not coming out as whole as possible from an adverse project or project adverse to their resources is pretty slim to none. So that said, you can do all your due diligence on all of these people, parties, other tribes, but really one thing I also see lacking is yourself, your own due diligence on yourself. What do we want or need? What are we expecting? Worst case scenario, most of these TPOs are smart. They know, they have the end in sight, and they say, okay, we want to avoid. And maybe we spend so much time on avoiding something that we know legally the project doesn't have to avoid it, right? Maybe we know the alternatives aren't going to pan out, and we know ultimately deep down inside the worst case scenario is happening. This project might plow through something. And so what are the tribe's needs? And so sitting down internally, and this is really kind of where I focus, if I'm an attorney getting hired by a tribe, what do you guys want out of this? And oftentimes they don't know. They don't know, and they don't know what their options, they don't know what the models are, they don't know what's been done out there, they don't know what this company is willing to do, they don't know what the agency is willing to do, they don't know the politics of the advisory council, they just don't know what their options are. And so it's my job to lay all the options out, right? And say, here's all the things that maybe you can consider. And if you consider the first three things or the first two things or only the first thing, then there's a strategy behind every one of those things that we need to start now. So that's how I work. That's what I work with in terms of due diligence, scoping what the tribe wants and needs out of a project and getting to work. Now, just like I mentioned earlier, some of the pre-consultation tactics these have been around for a long time. I think my very first 106 project, I could have pulled this right out of that tactic. You want to have your strategic dialogue with the applicant, the agency, the tribes, the interested parties. In the very least, even if you don't like them, they don't like you, they don't pick up the phone call. I don't know what the situation could possibly be, but assume, high standards, high level dialogue can happen, at least introductions in the very least. What you want to do at any point is you want to make sure that you initiate a dialogue to show that you care, you're going to be there, you're going to be present, you're going to be participatory, and that you're on their radar, right? You at least have to be on the radar going forward. And not just because, an agency says you're required and you're listed. That's like a DF. I always consider that DF involvement. You want to go to the A involvement. You want to put yourself out there. I'm the TPO. I represent Tribe X. We're very concerned for these reasons. I just want to make an introductory call with you. And again, you should know all of those things we talked about earlier. You should know what their policy is working with tribes. You should know a little bit of their track record. You should know who they are. You should know, you can even ask questions. Do you think the agency is starting the process early enough? Is it, is there things that we might, like, is there somebody we can contact for technical questions on the project out here if we have more questions outside of 106? All those sorts of things you can ask in a pre-consultation inquiry or at least introductory call. And when you go through the list of people, it'll be very clear to you who your allies are, who your opponents are, and and potentially what opportunities you might have going forward. So this is all good to know before you walk into that first 106 meeting. So the consultation itself, I'd like to think most people have been in consultation already. They know the routine. They know that introductions can take up a whole half a day or a whole day, but introductions are very important. But my advice to you while you're sitting there with those folks, because you've done your due diligence, your next thing to do going forward are these things: come prepared and team up. When I say team up, I know resources again are thin and small, but it's really hard for one person to make all meetings, to know all things, especially a large project. It's good to have two of you, whether you're a TPO and a staffer, or a TPO and somebody from language, or a TPO and somebody from another office. Try to tag team any one project because you may not always be there. And it's also good to bounce ideas and be able to, when you debrief a consultation, how'd you think that went? Where do you think this is going? Why did this person show up at this phase? Who do we talk to next about that? So you have somebody to bounce some ideas for next steps off of. My also advice for first initial consultation is just to listen. It's hard to learn anything when you're talking. So listening is really important, and make sure you plan to do that and not necessarily talk. Note taking is really important. A lot of times in consultation, if you've been through the process and you've been through 2 or 3 or 4 Section 106 consultations, you'll notice a big bulk of time is repetition or bringing somebody back up to speed on something, right? You often have to, and that's courtesy, it's professional courtesy to make sure when you're talking with a group of people that everybody's at least as close as possible to the same page. And so what's important to make that more meaningful and not filtered and not haphazard is if everybody at the table is taking notes and they know where they're at, and if they've tag teamed. So these are some tactics to make sure you're not missing anything, and you're not missing processes, announcements, deadlines, important key information, development. And remember that as you are in 106, this project is processing on the side. Applicant, permits, engineering reports, scoping, everything's going on off to the side without you, all those little details. There is progress being made. There are going to be subtle changes or large changes with the project while you're in 106. You need to expect them. You need to know that all that mess is going on over somewhere else, and that they're going to give you updates and ask for your opinion in 106 as you go along. They may not tell you until you actually get to the table and say, well, we're going to change the size of these wind turbines to this many feet, and we're going to paint it this color. What do you think? So if you maintain notes and you are present, that's when you certainly get the most out of 106 to do your job as good as you can. Certainly ask lots of questions. Some questions, of course, in terms of your strategy, you don't want to ask all your questions in open 106. You want to certainly ask them sometimes offline. Sometimes they're more for agency people. Sometimes they're more for applicants. Sometimes other tribes. Sometimes consultants or experts that are also there, state people, SHPOs or TPOs. Make sure you scope and you kind of have some good reasonings, pros and cons, why you bring that to the 106 table or why you want to do a sidebar. So just be strategic. And again, expect surprises. That's the one thing I think that why people go into these thinking it's a battle and a war. It's because there's constant surprises and changes that are going to come your way. You know it deep down inside. So if you walk in knowing that's going to happen, that might change how things go for you. There's going to be changes in timing, scope of the project. They're going to change their position. You know, the applicant might change it, but some will withdraw their permits. Some will resubmit them and change them. And then you're back square on, you know, halfway through the project, you're going to pick it up where it was left off. And then you also have to look what the agency may seem like they're listing. And this is I think the biggest heartbreak from the tribal perspective. You go through months and months, if not years of consultation. You've given them a plethora of information. Maybe they identified a TCP or not, but they're still going to go through it because it doesn't mean just because they identify TCP doesn't mean the project's not going to adversely or avoid it. And all of a sudden, you know, the agency says, well, we have no other alternatives. We're going to go through this. So now we have a findings of adverse to the site. And then now you have to change it. And you're like, why did you shift your position? It seemed like you heard me and you understood me, understood me or us, that this was really critical in the APE, in the area of potential effect. So expect all these shifts and changes. And the agency, you may have had a shift in leadership too. And maybe they've been suggested to move things faster, or for whatever reason, you know, in terms of energy, for example, energy is a big thing that's kind of, you know, pulling the rug out from some of these processes. So really just be aware that these things can change. And again, you have to go back to your basics. Who's your allies? What are your resources? What's going to be your next steps? Shift your strategy. And to do that, you know, always know your rights in the process, assert them. And of course, you know, using your project management skills to the best of your ability. Again, we know you have dozens of other things going on at the same time, but tracking this project is pretty critical. One thing that helps with that relationship building, which takes an amazing amount of energy and time, is updating your internal and external partners and allies. So just keeping tabs. You know, I personally talk to the attorneys. As I'm representing somebody in 106 as an attorney, I call the attorneys from the different interested parties and different tribes and say, hey, is this on your radar? What did you guys think of this draft MOA? These are the kind of comments my clients are thinking of submitting. Do you want to share comments before we submit? These are things we do to just keep them updated and build these relationships. So you also want to check in with other consultation participants and keep a pulse on the consultation. So what you see from the tribal perspective, that agency is separating this process just for you under the federal responsibility. But there's a whole nother process going on outside the tribes, just so you know. Keep your pulse on that other process as well. So all of this said, all this due diligence done, all the prep work done, you've been to consultation. What is the landscape looking like for you? What direction do you overall want to go? Knowing all of these things. And here we are today in 2021. I can tell you the trend is moving into collaborations, adopting protective measures within the tribe, and engaging in these collaborative agreements. And how are tribes doing this? They're using their sovereignty, of course, like they always have. They establish and draft and create and enact and empower laws, resolutions, and policies. Here's a good example in our region, Fond du Lac Band. I think it was 2017, they adopted their right-of-way ordinance. If you read the ordinance, they hired a person that knows federal right-of-way laws, where they can actually engage in meaningful discussions about projects that will impact the tribe. So this is a good way of protecting land, getting in front of a technical aspect of land and cultural resources. There's lots of other tribal ordinances and samples out there, and NATHPO probably has a lot of resources. Friends and neighbors here, there's a lot of historic preservation laws. I kind of perused some of the historic preservation laws from the Wisconsin tribes, and I have to tell you, they're mostly outdated, people. Talking like early 2000s, maybe 2011, some 10 years ago. So, I make a point to look at your laws, do some soul searching. Where can you improve your position in protective measures? This also helps you get on the radar again and establish a relationship with your policymakers from the tribe, your governing bodies. That's a good tool to update it and also reestablish or grow your relationship with tribal leaders. Certainly some things, again, you might want to do is collaborate with other tribes. Safety in numbers, again, on certain projects. And it doesn't have to be a 106, it can be other projects out there. You build rapport and trust with other tribes. So let's talk about this trend of CBAs. So CBAs have been around for a while. And in my experience, CBAs have very seldom been sent out to tribes. And if they have, there was a long history of tribes across the country saying no to CBAs. CBAs, if I am representing a tribe and we do a CBA earlier, midway through the process, I will appear in the industry to be a sellout. We sold out for X amount of money. We sold out for this, that, or the other. I'm here to tell you from a neutral position that may be your policy. And if that's your policy, then that's your policy. If it's not your policy, or your policy is kind of trending where some tribes have different policies where you are going to entertain a CBA, you need to start thinking about what a CBA is and how it works, because it's a new tool that is giving some tribes a huge leg up in this process. It's not part of the process. You'll never see CBA in the NHPA. You'll never see it in the 92 amendments. You'll never see it in Bulletin 38. You'll never see a CBA anywhere. This is a private deal. This is a specific project-specific deal between you or a group of you, meaning community coalition of people, with the applicant on how do they make things right? How do they upfront find out what matters to, there's a finite group of people that are going to be affected by a project. How do they make things right with that group of people? So a CBA can be the whole group. A CBA can be just the tribe. There, an applicant can have several CBAs out there. And if they're written correctly, these are enforceable tools. So what's in a CBA for a tribe? Well, again, you have to go back to your soul searching question. What do we need? What do we want? What makes this right with us? If this goes through the way we see it on paper today, what can we do to mitigate things that aren't just protecting the resources in the ground, which is really limited in the actual NHPA MOA process? What makes us whole as a people, a thriving community that needs this land and this resource and this landscape as intact as possible? What if it's not as intact? What makes it better? What are ways we can do things? And some of these are, contributions to your historic preservation, land swapping, you know, straight out money for lost, you know, fishing rights or I'm sorry, impacted fishing abilities if there's a navigable water impact on fisheries. So there's all kinds of different aspects of what might be in a CBA. But it's important, I think, and for this purpose of this group for trending, it's important to know that there are CBAs out there, that there was a history of tribes saying, absolutely not, we're not going to appear as sellouts. But at the end of the day, some tribes said, okay, we know the project's going to happen legally, and it can, and there's nothing we can do about it unless the applicant and the agency have screwed up some way. Then we have to litigate that, which also costs a lot of money. Or we can go ahead and start entertaining and start negotiating a CBA with the applicant. So in the end of the day, tribes find that a benefit. Sometimes they need that, and it's really up to the policy of the tribe. But I would recommend, you know, certainly talk to your legal counsel about CBAs. Not all projects have that as an option. Sometimes applicants will have nothing to do with tribes and they would never do a CBA with the tribe. Some go straight forward to the tribes and try to do CBAs with them right off the bat to get their buy-in and find out what they need. So it really depends on the project and all kinds of other factors, but just want to make sure you're aware of this trend. I see we're almost at time, but I'm almost done too. I wanted to point out the goals we have for the interior. So obviously the interior governs these Historic Preservation Act responsibilities and functions. We know we have Deb Holland in here. Deb Holland is an Indigenous attorney and judge. She was a former freshman congresswoman from New Mexico. She is very cognizant of federal Indian law. She knows all about Section 106 in consultation. She has made in the past year some very public statements on what she thinks consultation should be. And if it wasn't well enough, she's fine with joining the ranks and saying it needs to be done correctly. She has also instituted an interior-wide effort to update consultations. She is also working with the ACHP on some or her administration is on some changes to Bulletin 38. Oh, let me just say one more thing about Holland. As lofty as we might have plans for Secretary Holland, we must be cognizant and remember that she works for President Biden. So however comfortable President Biden is in extending and advancing historic preservation initiatives will only go as far as President Biden. So just want to make sure you know everybody has limits. So we don't know what her track record will be. So far, we're a few months in, we're tracking all of her input on projects. And, you know, this time next year, we'll have a better handle on where she's pushed, where she's failed, where she's succeeded, and what we can expect going forward. But right now, large goals, knowing there's a limit out there somewhere. One last point before we wrap up, and I entertain questions, is about the Advisory Council. The Advisory Council is an amazing tool. They have also grown, inflated, and reorganized to carry out their duties with historic preservation. They have their website is always changing and growing. There's lots of case samples out there. I say peruse the site, get familiar with this third-party compliance agent of sorts and see what they're doing. What we've seen in the Trump administration to now has been very interesting. We've had a longtime director, John Fowler. I think he's been there since, so there's a council, of course, that's appointed by the president, and then there is an acting director, our director, which has been John Fowler since '97. He has resigned. And oddly enough, you know, during President Trump's administration, he brought in Amy Giorgiani. Amy is the wife of another high political appointee of Trump's during the administration. She has resigned just in January, and with her resignation, it's kind of, you know, upset the process of hiring a new executive director. So we are in transition with the ACHP. Reed Nelson is at the helm. I'm working with Reed on a couple projects right now. He's fantastic. He's fast. He's responsive. But more than anything, I tell tribes always, you know, have a relationship with Valerie Hauser. Tell her what the pulse is out here. You know, she gets caught up in ACHP bureaucracy from the DC perspective, and it's always good. And I always tell Valerie, you know, what I'm experiencing and some of the ways comparing and contrasting some of the projects going on with different agencies with that particular project and other ones, so that she has a pulse on what us practitioners are seeing and what we're noticing. And in some ways, for example, I felt bad for telling her this just a few weeks ago. I said, this project that we were doing under the Trump administration, the agency treated my tribal client better than the new administration with Secretary Holland. So they're doing everything what not to do here. So it's obviously making me concerned because we have these lofty goals for Secretary Holland. But again, I was honest to Valerie, you know, that the Trump administration treated tribal clients in this process better as of right now. Hopefully that changes tomorrow. But, you know, being honest and making sure that office has a pulse on what's going on really has an effect, because they're the ones talking to the agency leads. They're saying, whoa, federal agency, we're not okay with this MOA. We're not okay with this language. You go work with that tribe and fix that. So that's what they do. That's what they do. And there's another program analyst named William Dancingfeather. He works with Valerie. They have both been on the beat with me on other 106 projects. They're very helpful, and I highly recommend reaching out to them as a resource. I just want to point out one last thing, and most people on this call already know that the word of the day has always been TCPs, Traditional Cultural Properties, Bulletin 38. Super old, super antiquated. There's been an effort for a long time to update that. And there is an initiative by the ACHP to move towards from TCPs to traditional cultural landscapes, which is more tribal friendly. It considers all of those problems we have, that, you know, the vagueness of Bulletin 38 and the interpretations that are all out there that causes all a headache in the 106 process. We are working on getting the National Register to update these things. And this is, you know, a consultation with several of the agencies. We're going to be looking at case studies, best practices, and then ultimately update it. There's only two parts of the initiative here: promote the recognition and protection of Native traditional cultural landscapes, TCLs is what they'll be called, within the federal government, and address the challenges of consideration of Native American traditional TCLs in the 106 review process. So kind of looking at past cases to say, going forward, this is how we want things to look. So if you want to read all about the ACHP initiative, there's the link. And that is what is to come. So overall, my advice to you for THPO offices working with 106 is think of it as a business, build your company, invest in your company. If you're not going to do that, you're going to keep limping along the way you're limping along. And you got to build it with PR, you got to build it with money and with people. You should use technology, build your archives. It also helps you not just in 106, but it helps you with all that plethora of functions the THPO office does. Once you do this office good, it helps you, do language and culture and scoping and all the other stuff, because everything is in your tool belt. Certainly work internally as best you can. It's hard to do that because of politics. And really collaborate, stay open-minded to these CBAs if that's something you might want to do. Use your resources or get resources, watch these trends, watch the people, and most importantly, watch the timing of it all. Watch the whirlwind and where you are in the middle of that whirlwind and how it's going to go forward, and build yourself. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we've got a schedule to stick to. If there's any way that I can be helpful, my contact information is here. You can email me, call me, text me, whatever works for you. And it's been my pleasure to present. I see a question from Leslie Eisenberg about how the SHPO can best support tribal efforts. Well, that's a good question. I think a lot of the best practices apply to the SHPO office, quite honestly. I think if you look back at the THPO about, collaborating internally and externally, and reaching out to those tribal contacts in advance, and knowing what positions they have, if they are in the position of stating a position. And I think sometimes there's this belief that THPOs always should automatically know what the position is on any project right away. But quite honestly, they don't, because they are managing so much. So I think one way of the SHPO being supportive is reaching out to that tribe or tribes, or even offering to host a collaborative, preliminary discussion, pre-consultation discussion, and make sure that the SHPO is aware of broad concerns. If the tribes haven't had a chance, and that might be the tool for them to get together and say, okay, SHPO, we're worried about this, we're worried about that, or we know this, there's a track record with this or that. Maybe their due diligence can be shared with you as a SHPO to help guide the process or weigh in on the process from different angles. Anybody else have any advice on SHPO best practices?
Yes, morning, Sam. This is Bill Quackenbush.
Hi, Bill.
It's good to see you, first of all, and listen to your melodious voice. That's really nice. That said, yeah, in part, some of the things in the past that we've have internally noted regarding our workings with the SHPO, the different state and federal agencies, is that when our tribe, for example, goes to consult with a federal agency on a federally funded project, and oftentimes it seems like when we become signatories to a project for an MOA or a PA, for example, if it's the MOA is being directed towards a higher standard or for some preservation mitigation, sometimes it gets stuck and muddled down to the fact that the state requires at a minimum a certain amount of compliance for state statutes for, say, for example, the inadvertent discovery protocols, right? And yet the MOA, if it was signed by all the signatories on there, those higher levels that we were reaching for to protect and preserve, at a different level, oftentimes falls back to the minimum standards that are legally necessary. And the reason I say that is we've had several cases in the past. They're quite dated already, in time. But it was something that, as you mentioned there, are we taking those case studies and squirreling them away in order to recite, at a later date? And several tribes had made that point in discussion after the fact that we created an MOA, for example. We didn't meet that MOA, yet the private individuals or parties or that agency or whatever it was continue to carry on because they only really needed to, reach this high level. That said, we made it a point to ourselves to make sure we squirrel that away up, not only in our own thoughts and memories that we put it away, so we assure that next time we go to revisit or consult on an MOA or a process on there, that we make sure that everybody is clear that although these are the legal, levels that we need to father, this is where we're reaching for up to here. And that's where that mitigation process took place. We knew there was going to be unavoidable inadvertent discoveries taking place on here, and yet when it came time to that, we fell right back down into those trenches and following back upon what was just legally responsible by the landowner, for example. And so one of the things, though, that we look forward to in the last half a dozen years now, this enlightenment by the SHPO and the Historic Society, state agencies, that we all work together collaboratively and agree, to do what our due diligence are as preservation representatives up there. Maybe we can reach a higher standard together. That doesn't have to mean that we can only get to the minimal law, but we can reach for higher standards. And I think you're also right. Wisconsin is under these watchful eyes by other state agencies and other, to see what's going on over here too. And when we revisited that burial law here and made those amendments on here, I know of several states that were very anxious to see how that was taking, how it took an effect by the states, as well as how the tribes were affected by those laws.
That's very true. And even the Supreme Court case involving the mounds here in Madison, we had numerous states watching how the Supreme Court was going to uphold that burial law. They were either under script or thinking of amending their own state laws, and they thought, this looks really good on paper, but does it hold true in a political situation at the Supreme Court? So you're right. They are watching.
It's hard for me to explain to people, what's it like to do a process, to do a project on tribal lands, or to get the special permissions that we have to get, or when we sometimes do more on tribal reservations than we do in municipalities. I can't say, well, it's like when we worked in Minocqua or Spread Eagle or Wausau. it's not like anything else. These are sovereign nations. We have government-to-government relationships with these tribes. And we respect it differently, we carry on business differently, and we just have to wrap our minds around the fact that it's going to be different.
Well, the whole point of offering cultural awareness training and sensitivity training is to give people tools to make them feel more confident when they're talking to communities. We don't want to send our staff to a table to meet with tribal representatives without understanding, at least generally, who they're talking to. Giving someone those tools helps them develop confidence and definitely helps cultivate a better relationship between our regions and our tribal communities.
I think what's really important for state employees that are working with tribal governments is to understand that tribes have their own government structures, their own policies, jurisdiction over their land and resources. And as a state agency, we are required to consult with tribes on any particular area related to transportation. So this really serves as a comprehensive overview of what it means to work with tribes.
I think it provides a great way to bridge the gap that had existed for many years. You know, our relationship with the federal government has not always been a good one, you know, so it kind of is reducing the paternalistic relationship that we have with the federal government. It's kind of putting the ball in our court. We're given the opportunity to talk about ourselves and let them know how they can communicate with us so that we can work together better.
From my experience, when you're working with state employees, they might not understand, and for that reason, they're always kind of hesitant, and they're avoiding trying not to offend anybody. But I think that if they had that knowledge going into the conversation, that those relationships might be able to be built because those walls would come down on both parts.
It gave me a much better grasp of the relationship between tribal, state, and federal governments, which I really had no idea what it was about. There are a lot of nuances which I still don't grasp. The big thing was the history of how the tribes were treated in the course of the United States expansion. Some of their court decisions, you know, things like that are just actually mind-boggling today. It was probably the most eye-opening course I've ever taken at the Department of Transportation.
I had no idea that over and over and over again did the government break their agreements with the Native Americans. I had no idea that how far back it went, and you know how many times things were just rewritten or just to benefit the, I don't want to say the government, like but really just very unfair to Native Americans and their tribe, and just to tribes all over the country. I had no idea that the government made any promises, or made so many promises and didn't keep them, and not just promises but actual contractual agreements.
Court decisions really stood out because, on the face of it, that's just absolutely ridiculous. That they were making these decisions based on, the natives had no rights, or we want their land and therefore we're going to say they're not human.
They have to have residual effects of that era because that's what's passed on, and I had never considered that before. And I think that really struck me as a pretty sad time in our history that we did that.
There were a few things I knew about. I've heard of the Trail of Tears and some of the battles and stuff, but they never told me in school or any of the history I've seen about the boarding school program, court decisions that said Indians are Chinese, therefore can't testify against a white man. The Pueblo was another one that was kind of shocking because at first, they were very peaceful, good going, everything till valuable minerals were discovered on their lands. And all of a sudden they were, drunken savages that had to be moved.
After taking the training, I was taking a college English class at the time, and I was able to visit the Native American school here in Franklin, in the Milwaukee area, because I had cousins that went there. And I mean, it's just, I didn't realize then at the time when I visited the school what kind of impact it had or the importance of it, until taking this training and doing the research to write my papers, just how valuable, our culture is to us, and how, that Native American culture is to Native Americans, and how we really need to respect that and value that.
We're woven into the history of Native Americans so much, and people just either take it for granted or don't really have a desire to learn it, but it surprises me that more people don't. And the other thing too is they should want to take the class just to be able to do their own job better, professionally and personally, to accept their neighbors and friends that might be Native Americans that they don't even know. They don't even know their background or history.
It's what you have to experience it, for yourself, because everybody is going to take something different out of it. That's the interesting thing about it. You can go to 4 of these or 5 of these, however many we have in the state. Every one of them is different because the conversation sways where the training actually goes, and that in itself is unique. It's not a poster presentation. You decide what you're going to want to learn. You ask the questions to better help you with your job.
I think it was in the late 70s when the spearing first started. Can't be 100% sure of the exact year, but they did have a rally in Rhinelander, with plans to go to boat landings to protest it. And I happened to be home. I was driving a truck at the time. I did go to the rally, listen to it, basically agreed, but I thought the idea of going to boat landings to actually protest was probably over the top. But if I had known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have been popular because I would have said something.
Anytime you get a chance to learn something new, take advantage of it. And this will be something that it's mind-blowing. It really is. It's a great opportunity, and it's worth every minute of it. You won't be disappointed.
It's hard for me to explain to people, well, what's it like to do a process, to do a project on tribal lands, or to get the special permissions that we have to get, or when we sometimes do more on tribal reservations than we do in municipalities. I can't say, well, it's like when we worked in Minocqua or Spread Eagle or Wausau. It's not like anything else. These are sovereign nations. We have government-to-government relationships with these tribes. And we respect it differently, we carry on business differently, and we just have to wrap our minds around the fact that it's going to be different.
Well, the whole point of offering cultural awareness training and sensitivity training is to give people tools to make them feel more confident when they're talking to communities. We don't want to send our staff to a table to meet with tribal representatives without understanding, at least generally, who they're talking to. Giving someone those tools helps them develop confidence and definitely helps cultivate a better relationship between our regions and our tribal communities.
I think what's really important for state employees that are working with tribal governments is to understand that tribes have their own government structures, their own policies, jurisdiction over their land and resources. And as a state agency, we are required to consult with tribes on any particular area related to transportation. So this really serves as a comprehensive overview of what it means to work with tribes.
I think it provides a great way to bridge the gap that had existed for many years. Our relationship with the federal government has not always been a good one, so it kind of is reducing the paternalistic relationship that we have with the federal government. It's kind of putting the ball in our court. We're given the opportunity to talk about ourselves and let them know how they can communicate with us so that we can work together better.
From my experience, when you're working with state employees, they might not understand, and for that reason, they're always kind of hesitant, and they're avoiding trying not to offend anybody. But I think that if they had that knowledge going into the conversation, that those relationships might be able to be built because those walls would come down on both parts.
It gave me a much better grasp of the relationship between tribal, state, and federal governments, which I really had no idea what it was about. There are a lot of nuances which I still don't grasp. The big thing was the history of how the tribes were treated in the course of the United States expansion. Some of the court decisions, things like that are just actually mind-boggling today. It was probably the most eye-opening course I've ever taken at the Department of Transportation.
I had no idea that over and over and over again did the government break their agreements with the Native Americans. I had no idea that how far back it went, and how many times things were just rewritten or just to benefit the, I don't want to say the government, but really just very unfair to the Native Americans and their tribe, and just to tribes all over the country. I had no idea that the government made any promises, or made so many promises and didn't keep them, and not just promises but actual contractual agreements.
Court decisions really stood out because, on the face of it, that's just absolutely ridiculous. That they were making these decisions based on, the natives had no rights, or we want their land and therefore we're going to say they're not human.
They have to have residual effects of that era because that's what's passed on. And I had never considered that before. And I think that really struck me as a pretty sad time in our history that we did that.
There were a few things I knew about. I've heard of the Trail of Tears and some of the battles and stuff, but they never told me in school or any of the history I've seen about the boarding school program, court decisions that said Indians are Chinese, therefore can't testify against a white man. The Pueblo was another one that was kind of shocking because at first, they were very peaceful, good going, everything till valuable minerals were discovered on their lands. Then all of a sudden they were, drunken savages that had to be moved.
After taking the training, I was taking a college English class at the time, and I was able to visit the Native American school here in Franklin, in the Milwaukee area, because I had cousins that went there. And I mean, it's just, I didn't realize then at the time when I had visited the school what kind of impact it had or the importance of it until taking this training and doing the research to write my papers, just how valuable our culture is to us, and how that Native American culture is to Native Americans, and how we really need to respect that and value that.
We're woven into the history of Native Americans so much. People just either take it for granted or don't really have a desire to learn it, but it surprises me that more people don't. And the other thing too is they should want to take the class just to be able to do their own job better, professionally and personally, to accept their neighbors and friends that might be Native Americans that they don't even know. They don't even know their background or history.
It's what you have to experience it, for yourself, because everybody is going to take something different out of it. That's the interesting thing about it. You can go to 4 of these or 5 of these, however many we have in the state. Every one of them is different because the conversation sways where the training actually goes, and that in itself is unique. It's not a poster presentation. You decide what you're going to want to learn. You ask the questions to better help you with your job.
I think it was in the late 70s when the spearing first started. Can't be 100% sure of the exact year, but they did have a rally in Rhinelander, with plans to go to boat landings to protest it. And I happened to be home. I was driving a truck at the time. I did go to the rally, listened to it, basically agreed, but I thought the idea of going to boat landings to actually protest was probably over the top. But if I had known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have been popular because I would have said something.
Anytime you get a chance to learn something new, take advantage of it. And this will be something that it's mind-blowing. It really is. It's a great opportunity, and it's worth every minute of it. You won't be disappointed.
So anyway, so what I was mentioning too was that I was just talking about the second portion of the cultural exchange project that is taking place today, right now, and that the first day or yes for this portion there, I made mention of the fact that we had wanted to include a cultural exchange process, even though this was being a virtually held meeting. That said, after we talked a little bit about how we came about picking the Ho-Chunk courting food as that exchange gift, and in part, in return, those receiving that would perhaps finish their flute and experience playing their flute, and for the exchange portion come back and possibly speak about their experience, as well as play their flute a little bit for the listening session participants. That said, one of the things I also mentioned was that it's interesting that we have the ability, all of us together, to take a portion of our heritage, or something culturally unique to our own communities there, and bring it to these gatherings like this, and in part using it as a icebreaker, of course, and also give us the ability to learn a little bit more about ourselves. So that said, one of the things that wasn't mentioned as much yesterday was that when you receive this food, traditionally, when a cultural gift is given to another, there's usually a story that comes along with that item there. So the person that is receiving that knows, to some degree, the importance of why, that the person giving it to you, that is reflected upon their culture or their heritage. That said, this flute that you receive, this Ho-Chunk courting flute, comes with a specific story. So I think if everybody can hear me right now, I think I'm going to actually tell you the Ho-Chunk story that comes with that courting flute that you folks have received. This is a story that would be given with the flute at the time the individual received that. Usually, and traditionally, it would have been with our young men when they get into that adolescent age where they begin courting. So the story kind of goes, and this is no different than other culture once upon a time, right? Well, when talking with one of our language speakers, Elliot Garvin, he says, well, that would have been said like something like some time ago, type like that. But it, in essence, means the same thing. And so oftentimes when I speak to school groups, for example, I use that same terminology, once upon a time, because they're kind of familiar with that, right? And as all stories are told orally, there's certain things within that story that should be said as it's being repeated time and time again. Those stories become orally sunk into those individuals listening or hearing that story. So the story on this flute, for example, is told as, it's called the Ho-Chunk Rizuzuk Koto Koto. And it's the story of the Ho-Chunk courting. So once upon a time, or some time ago, there was this village located in one of our traditional areas. And in this village, there was this young man. And this young man's name was Marvin. Right, Marvin? No, it wasn't Marvin. His name was Kunu. And in this story, Kunu was well liked, not only by his parents and the elders of the village, but also everyone associated with the village and around there, because Kunu was an individual that always took it upon himself to step up. And if there was a gathering or doings taking place there, he'd be one of the first ones of his age to come before, the elders and the people that are putting together there, and asking them what he could do to help out. And And for this, then he was well liked amongst the village as a whole. But as Kuna was growing up, he began to notice this beautiful girl in the village as well. It just happened to be the chieftain's daughter. And as he began to notice her more, and in passing by, he used to be able to talk to her when he was younger, but as he was growing up, he became kind of infatuated with her, or he really became enamored by this young, beautiful girl. And so he became nervous, and he had a hard time speaking with her at each time in passing. So he began to avoid her. And so Kunu, as days went on there, the village around him began to notice that he was acting kind of, funny around this beautiful girl. So one day Kunu was walking past one of his elders sitting next to a fire. And he stopped by and he says, Choka, his grandfather there, he says, I got a question. I have a problem. I was wondering if you could answer. And Choka says, Kunu, sit down. He goes, sit down. He says, we noticed that you're having this difficult time when you're around this girl. He goes like that. And we talked about it amongst ourselves, and we think that we can help you. And so Kunu, he sat down next to his Choka there, and he says, so Kunu, he says, tomorrow morning, he says, to help you with your problem with speaking to this young girl, he goes, you get up before the village awakes, he goes like that, and you grab your spear pouch and your tobacco pouch and your water bag, and you go off to the north and go up, he says like that, and start traveling that way. And you're going to run into Chaskafade, the great white deer. And once you meet, the great white deer, he goes, he has something for you. He goes like that. You bring that back to the village here, and it'll help you win over your heart's desire. And so Kunu grew excited about this. And that evening, when he went to sleep, he could hardly sleep. So he woke up the next morning before the village began to arise, and he did just as his Choka had said. He grabbed his spear pouch and his tobacco pouch and his water bag, and he headed to the north. And soon after he began walking there, he come across these large tracks in the ground, and they were the biggest deer tracks he had ever saw. And he thought to himself that this must be Chaskafade's tracks. He goes like that. So he started following these deer tracks. And he followed them throughout the whole day. And it grew evening there, and he realized that he would have to stop there. And so he stopped in the small valley where there was a small stream there. And Kuna built himself a small fire, and he sat down and he placed some tobacco across that fire there, and he gathered some water in his water bag, and he sat there and he said his prayers to Mahona, thanking him for putting him on this journey here, so that he could find something that would, give him the ability to be able to talk to his heart's desire. And soon he fell asleep. And when Kunu fell asleep, in amongst his dreams there, this little woodpecker came to Kunu. It says, Kunu, he says, you did a good thing. He said, you asked your Choka for some guidance, he gave it to you, and tomorrow you'll continue on in your journey there, and you'll find Chaskafade, this great white deer, and he'll give you something that you can bring back there to win over your heart's desire. And the next morning he woke up and he was so excited to have this dream, as if it was just happening to him in real time. He goes and he placed some tobacco across those embers of his fire that was going out there, and he was fast on his way. And he began following these tracks again for a whole other day, traveling. And it was getting dusk out there. And finally he comes up through this valley there, and up in between these two hills in the saddle up there, as the sun was setting to the west, here was this silhouette of this big deer. And although black, he said to himself, this must be Chaskafade there. And in his travels, he had become so weakened from not eating and drinking little bits of water for the last 2 days there, he didn't know what else to do. So he reached upon his spear pouch and pulled out his spear there. And when he pulled that spear back, this is the only way he thought that he could slow down Chaskafade enough for him to be able to gain what he had for him. And so when he pulled that spear back there, ready to throw it up there at that deer there, Our mother, the grandmother of the earth, she does what she always does at dusk there. And she takes that last deep breath in the evening. And as she took that last deep breath in the evening before the woods become calm, this is what Kunu heard. So as Kunu had heard that, he was struck by that sound, and he looked off to the right up on top of the hill where that sound had come from. And although he had that spear still pulled back there to throw at that great white deer, he looked back and the deer had fell off the backside of that hill and down and disappeared. And it became too late in the evenings there, so Kunu was forced to go back down into the valley and build himself once again a little fire next to a stream there. And so he gathered some water in his water bag there, and as the fire was going, he placed some more tobacco, some Dani across that fire there. And he began to thank Moana, the creator there, for bringing him to this place here, and thanking him for seeing the great white deer there, that there must be a reason why he is here. And he fell fast asleep. And in his sleep, once again, a little woodpecker came to Kunu, and Kunu, he says, Kunu, you did a great thing. Tomorrow, go up to where Chashkahude was standing there and receive the gift that he had laid there for you, and for you to take it back and learn to win over your heart's desire. The next morning, as he woke, he was so excited once again there. He placed some tobacco across the fire once again, and he thanked the creator there for bringing him there. And he was fast on his journey back up that valley to where he had first heard that sound. And as Kunu was going up the valley there, and as the sun was rising behind him up the east there, our grandmother Earth did exactly what she has did ever since time immemorial. And she took that first breath of the day when the winds began to blow in the morning. And instantly, Kunu heard this. And the moment Kunu heard that, he realized that must be why the day brought me to this place. So he went up into that saddle and scurried up that hill to where he heard that sound. And sitting in this cedar tree up there was that very little woodpecker that he had saw in his dreams there. And the woodpecker was doing exactly what little woodpeckers do. It was just like clicking on this limb up there. And the moment he looked at that woodpecker and the woodpecker looked back at Kunu, he fluttered away. And Kunu said to himself, this must be why I was brought here. And he climbed up this cedar tree and he reached up there and he snapped off that limb that woodpecker was sitting on there, and he scurried out and back down that tree. And he stood in the ground there and he looked at that stick that he had broken off there, that limb, and he blew on it and shook it around, but that sound wouldn't come out of that. He even stuck it up in the air and he waved it all around it, but no sound would come out of it. But he just knew that's where that sound must come. So he set it down alongside his spear and his spear torch, and he turned around and began his journey back to his village. Well, throughout the rest of that day, he travels, and into the evening there, he grew tired from no eating and just a little bit of water. And as Kunu found a nice stream to sit down and rest, he built himself a fire. He placed some tobacco across that flame once again. And as he was saying his prayers to Moana for bringing him to that site and gathering that stick where he think that sound came from, he fell fast asleep. And in his dream, once again, that little red woodpecker come to him. He says, Kunu, you did a great thing. He says, you've gathered what Chaskachate had brought you there. And take that back with you now. And that is called an Ochum courting. You're going to learn how to play that like that. And once you play that, when you return to your village, you will win over your heart's desire. So the next morning as he woke up, he once again placed some tobacco on those dying embers there and said a few words of thanks, and he was continued on his journey back to the village. As he traveled that whole day and through that evening and into the next, go like that, he began to learn to play that flute the way he felt fit. And the next morning, as that village, he returned to that village, he sat upon top of a hill there, overlooking his village, and he crossed his legs and he pulled out his flute. And the village was just becoming awake in the morning there. And Kunu, he took out his flute and he played the following. And as Kunu began to play that song up there, the whole village surrounding him below began to hear something that they had never heard before. And so all the young children that were coming out of the Chakota caves and playing around, they stopped and looked on top of the hill. And all the women that were going out to the gardens in the morning, they stopped and turned around to hear this sound, see this sound where it's coming from this hill. And the elders that were sitting around the fires out there and starting the fires up there, they stopped to listen because they had not heard that sound ever before either. And as he was playing that song up there, this young girl, this maiden, came out of this Chakota cave, and she looked up there. And the moment she had heard this song, she realized that song was made just for her from this young man, Kuno, and that song was just for her. And so that's the story, in part, that it comes along with the food for the ho chunk. And when we tell this story, as with a lot of our stories, there's certain key aspects of those stories that you want to take away from you. And each time you hear that story, those same things are in these stories that we tell. That said, when Marv mentioned yesterday that, they have this, a process that included the deer, and our story for our Ho-Chunk Korte food involves this woodpecker and the deer as well. And you'll find this in many different Native communities, stories that are similar, but they still have their own unique processes for their own. And oftentimes you'll see that the case. And so that's the story that comes along with that Korte flute that you folks received out there. And one of the things also, if I could share my screen here, I'm going to also show you something that's different. I use this story on occasion with other stories that we're allowed to tell folks in the public. Certain stories can only be told certain times of years, for example. Certain, stories are just made to be told within our own clans, and so on and so forth. This story here, though, was told recently by myself with some students in Madison. And there was a teacher that had come before us asking if we would have the ability to come to speak with her third grade class about how to get rid of that right there, about how oral history amongst tribes work. And I said, well, I can do that. I says, I usually have a priority process that I use here to for our educational outreach, and our priorities usually lie first amongst our Ho-Chunk youth and our families and our communities and our tribal communities. And I says, and then if I have spare time, then I begin to spread this love out there with outside communities and interest groups. And it just so happened the date she picked ended up being in a period of time where I was going to be in Madison for another process there. And I thought, well, I can swing through and I can talk to your students about oral history and how it plays such an important role for Ho-Chunk people. And so what I did was I real quickly threw a PowerPoint together. That's the easiest way for me to stay on track when I speak on oral history and oral stories and how it plays an important role in our tribes, for example, in our communities still to this day. And as I talked about how it all began, this lady is named Emily Schrader. Some of you may know her. She was a third grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary, and this is her students out, and we visited since then, brought her class out there to talk a little bit more about what oral history was all about. So I talk about the Ho-Chunk people, our steep history in Wisconsin, right? And how oral history plays important roles and who can tell stories and what are they used for, their various uses. So that said, when I talk about our history, we talk about our steep presence in our ancestral areas. And I even talk about the historic periods and how things transformed in our areas, right? Since the 1600s, the French, the British, and early Americans, and who we are today, and perhaps where we're going to be in the future. And so there's a variety of different things to utilize to tell stories. You use our nature around you, right? Ongoing events, the process of the tribes involved in. One of the things I always forewarn people about oral history, and I was telling this to a third grade group, right? About our steep presence, and all the 11 tribes that are in Wisconsin today, or 12. And I says, and how we have really been treating our environment and the surroundings around us, and why it's important to assure we have an accurate history of how we've lasted thousands of years here, only to see in the last 400 years, things really going the other way, right? And hopefully these third graders could grow up to become, great environmentalists in the future type thing. Well, so I talk about our history here and on who all has the ability to talk and how, stories have been told in many ways. Not only is the written language, right? But there's also petroglyphs and rock art and oral history that stands the test of time. And I talk about oral history as holding as much weight, if not more today, than any written document out there. I mean, because it just takes a moment in time where you get one culture group trying to destroy another one, and they destroy not only the people but the history about them, and they're gone forever. So we always rely on oral history versus anything written about us, because truth be told, written history isn't very accurate about Native communities anyway. And I said, look at all the people, we don't know anything about people because they're past history, because they're gone, and the written documents, we don't understand it, and they're petroglyphs, right? Here we have one community, a group of people that was destroying another group of people back in the 40s there. And one of the first things they did was they took everything in written literature that was written about those people and they burned them in the streets to wipe them off the face of this earth. And then today we rely so much with our database and our electronic processes here, where tomorrow they could be gone with just a blurb of, an electrical blurb out there. And all those books that you scan and throwing away because you can save space in just one little box, that could be gone tomorrow. So that's what I told these students. At the end, I said, okay, the third graders, they were enthralled with this. The teacher had asked, Emily Schrader had asked if she could have me tell this oral story. And I said, well, I'll give them three options: a story of the porcupine and how it received its quills, the history of Kunuga and what birch means to the Ho-Chunk people, the little insignia of the thunders on the birch and how that entails. Or I can talk to you about, the history of the Ho-Chunk courting flute, right? And all the students, they voted upon me telling this story on here, this story I just told you. Bottom line is, I told the story. She asked if she could audio tape that. I said, yes, that's perfectly fine. It's just a practical story and you can use it for whatever you want. And she did that. She asked for permission to use the story. Basically, in short, she wanted to have the students draw the story out in an art form. So they took each aspect of the story and they broke it down into these series of images there that they drew with, I think, crayons, color crayons of all things. And they told the story with pictures. From the moment we talk about the village and Kunu and his chokas interactions, him going after the great white deer, all the way to where he received the flute and brought it back and he went over his heart's desire. They told that story in pictures. And not only that, they then wanted to translate this, because this Lincoln Elementary School in Madison is a multicultural school. They wanted to also translate this into Spanish and make it a bilingual book for their own use there, because they said, we don't have anything like that here that talks about oral history. Can you do that? And I couldn't even remember Emily from the time I went there to when I went back a couple of weeks, or at least she emailed, and I said, oh yeah, that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to tell the Ho-Chunk story, why don't you tell it in Ho-Chunk? I said, like that would serve it better, as well. And she did that. She actually went to our languages division there, our Ho-Chunk's language division, and began to work with the Nakusita's language folks up there. I think it was Hope Smith who had worked with with her, with the area students there, language students there, and they developed the book to draft form. And then she brought it back and says, I'd like to go over this with my students and show you what we did. And I was pretty excited about that, but I couldn't remember who she was yet. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'm going to be over here in Dane County's McCarthy Youth and Conservation Park working on another matter. You want us to stop in there? And so we did. She stopped in there. We sat around and talked about what we were doing at the McCarthy Youth and Conservation Park. And we met and kind of like scratched our heads, and this was pretty neat. I said, let's bring the students back here and we'll do some reading of this, both the students there, be a good PR, and you can have your book. Well, she did that. And we also had some of our staff there putting on game of lacrosse, talked about raised garden beds. We did a whole bunch of stuff that day. But the biggest thing is we talked about this book. And they even put a little library out there, and she said, well, if we develop this book, and if we print it, we can put some books in this storytelling area that we had developed at this park out there. So that's really good, I says. And so she took her students, and they in part made the story, the library out there too. So there it is. And so here we are in the Chapotake out there, reading the book. I'm stumbling through some of the Ho-Chunk words the best I could up here because they had worked with it with Nakusa over there, and I'm not really a fluent reader or Ho-Chunk language. I mean, I have a hard time reading English, let alone read Ho-Chunk, right? But anyway, so here we are, end of the day, after a hard day. There's some of my staff, there's Emily and some of the area folks. Weeks later, I got a whole bunch of emails or this mail, these letters of thanking us and everything here. So we talked a little bit more about the book, and if we wanted to print it, if she was serious about that, I buy the copyright from all her work on there, and I had some money through my TPO there to print out several, 1,000 books out of there, but she'd have to go through the IRB, and she did everything there was to be done, and she ended up printing out this book. And what she said was the reason why we needed that is because this is what Madison used their curricula for teaching school-age kids the history of Native Americans. And there wasn't anything hardly in there about, Ho-Chunk history in the Madison area, even though I kept telling her time and time again, well, Ho-Chunk traditionally, that's one of the first places we returned to when the glacier was receding, as they joked about when the glacier was made, when the Yahara watershed was being made. I mean, our stories are beautiful about this area. You should tell that story to these students, right? Well, anyway, so long story short, says the students, when she first asked what their thoughts were on Native Americans, she received these real ugly, gory pictures about natives, dressed up in feathers and teepees, and what it is, they're cavemen-like looking outfits and everything. So she in short talked about, how she needed to take this upon herself to help her own students, but maybe we could all gain from that. So out of that process for her, though, she did, like I said, she worked with the folks over there in Nakusa area. And so they began to translate the story in Spanish as well. The book itself is something that I think, she cited many materials in the back that she gathered information from. And she even has a pretty nice little pitch in the back about the Ho-Chunk people and why she did this endeavor. So anyway, so they worked throughout the process here of a gathering. She even took, and this is kind of funny, not funny, but she even took her students to them to experience some of the things the tribal cultures are experiencing in this day and age. And she took them in that sub-zero weather out to save the mounds around the Capitol there when the tribes united to go and protect burial sites, because the amendments, the state law was being attacked at the time. They were trying to strip it of its teeth and the ability to protect burial sites on there, not only natives, but anybody's burials. And so, but the tribes took it upon themselves to kind of speak up here. And she wanted those students to experience the same thing. So she bundled all them students up there and took them out there, and they marched around the Capitol as well. And I guess the students really enjoyed that evening. So back to this book, though. Invited her up to the Ho-Chunk the language division in Boston there. They have a sound room out there. We had the Spanish speaker here. Oleni, I can't remember her name was Olea. Anyway, Emily and myself. And Elliot Garvin is the one we had chosen to read the story for the book. In the book, she put in QR codes in the book of the Ho-Chunk, the English and the Spanish reading of this. So that was incredible. I thought that she took the time to add all of this to this little, third grade educational tool she was creating. The stories itself, then to top that off, after we went through the IRB and purchased the copyrights, I said, well, let's just have yourself a book, signing party. And she thought that would be pretty cool. She was that was her last year that she was going to be here, and she was going to go down to South America there to really chase one of her dream was that to teach groups in other countries. That's where she's still at today. So she put on the book signing party, and her class that drew the images in there for that fourth part of this story done in images on here, they're now fifth graders at this time in this picture here. So it was 2 years, and the students that came back, there was all but 2 were here. And so they all received their book. And I tell you what, and when these students, when they received a copy of their finished book there and shook hands with Emily and I and their instructors in front of their parents and their peers in that school there, these kids took great pride in that process there. So there's a lot of buy-in from these students there. I think, so there we are. We gave them a book or 2 of them there and shook their hands. They thought that was pretty cool. And then, so there's that flute. I just got them playing right here. That's the flute I was telling you earlier that I made, maybe not you folks, but this is the one I made early on in life to kind of shadow what my Choka's flute kind of looked like right on there. It's the same flute that's in that book right there. If you look in the book, it's the same pictures of that same flute. And so I had some cake. I think we had punch there. We didn't have Kool-Aid, a traditional drink of Kool-Aid, right? But no, we didn't have that. But we learned a lot from this process that it's something that you can do time and time again. And it's not just Native culture. You can do this any culture. I mean, I live in a community here in Black River that has Germans, Bohemians, Norwegians, and all different kinds of cultural, communities around here too. And the same thing can be done with each one of them too. So anyway, so that is in part, let me get off of this here. In short, the reason I wanted to tell that story of that flute, because that definitely goes along with that flute you folks possess now there. And it should also be added to it. You have the ability to tell your experience of that, receiving that same flute and tell the story as it gets passed on from you forth. So that said, I was also kind of asked by Stacy there to continue to pursue having some of the folks that received one of the courting flutes there to speak a little bit about their experience. And so what I'm going to do also, I think you can see me, I have putting down the remainder of the names on sticky notes here of those that haven't, had an opportunity to talk about their flute. And so what I'm going to ask is, Kim, if you can pick a number between 1 and 3.
2.
Here it is. Whoa. Okay, can I have you pick a number between 1 and 7?
6.
6 it is. Silas Peterson. Are you around?
Celeste?
You mean Celeste?
It is Celeste. It is Celeste. Sorry about that, Celeste.
It's okay.
Silas, what's the matter with me?
I thought you were just joking because Colin does that to me all the time.
Oh, well, there, I will continue on that trait. It's a Ho-Chunk trait, so. Messing up people's names is.
Yeah, so I actually didn't get mine until Saturday, so I was glad that I was not called yesterday, which gave me a chance to work on it. I when I first opened it, the smell reminded me of back home. I also added some beads to the leather. I chose the colors of the 4 directions. And then I also attempted to do some Ojibwe flowers. And I used the word attempted in bold letters. But I was just a little nervous with painting, and I practiced on other types of paper. So I just like stopped practicing and I just went with it. And then I actually like had a lot of fun painting it, and it actually turned out pretty cool. But I chose like the Ojibwe flowers and the 4 directions just to kind of represent my culture a little bit. And then I also, I don't know if you can see, I placed a heart in somewhat of the middle of the flute, because that kind of represents like our heart is the center of us all. And then I also rubbed olive oil on it because I did not get the sandpaper or the other oil. But I really like the way that it turned out. Really enjoyed like sanding and drawing and painting. I did get a little paint on this part, so I had to kind of cover up the accidental painting. But I felt very relaxed and kind of in a meditated state while doing this. So I really appreciate this and enjoyed this process. Do you want me to play?
Oh yeah, you betcha.
My daughters are sick of me. I've been practicing since last night. I couldn't come up with a fancy song like Sandy did. But
Oh, no, that's super beautiful. One thing I noticed on your flute when you're playing, that little bird right there, make sure that the bottom of that bird is in line with that edge of that thippo. Slide that bird of yours just down just ever so slightly so it's in line with that edge. All right, and now try it again once you get close.
it sounds much better.
Yeah, it'll take away that hollow sound a little bit. And again, with everybody's flutes, there was some little tick marks I put in the corners. That was a good area to start out with, but slide it back and forth, and sooner or later you're going to find out where the sweet spot is for that bird or totem to sit on top. Okay. That said, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. And sorry about the name. Bad, Colin. Colin probably told me what your name was first, so.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So you get a choice between number 3 and number 1.
Number 1.
All right. Now you get a choice between 1 and 7.
6.
6 is a Richard Monet.
He's not on here.
I don't think he's on.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7.
5. How about I just pick somebody?
Yes.
Okay. I want to hear from Amy.
There we go. Amy Coughlin.
Of course you do.
Perfect.
So this was really exciting for me. When I got this, I was really excited. And when I opened it, the smell of it reminded me of my dad, because my dad does a lot of woodworking. And it also reminds me of my dad because in our family, we kind of are connected by music. And he's actually in the process of giving me guitar lessons. I waited too long before I was going to have him teach me, but so my dad and I are kind of connected by music. And so I'm pretty excited to be able to take this and share it with him this weekend. But I haven't put the oil on it yet. I kind of take a long time to decide what I'm going to do. So, but what I did do was I got this beaded leather from my grandmother, who just turned 100 this year. And I got it from her probably 30 years ago. And I've had it for that long. And when I got this, I knew exactly what I wanted to put on it. So it makes me think of my grandma, and another leather that I had gotten from someone special too. So I can play it. I haven't practiced like everybody else, but I will try. So Bill, thank you so much for this wonderful gift. It really does mean a lot.
Yes. I clapped, but everybody was on mutes, but I'm sure the clapping is. One thing too that you'll find with an A flute, especially with the flute you have, the holes are fairly large.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of laying the balls of your finger in there, lay your finger across, and you get better contact, because that's always a killer of a good flute is air seeping past the finger. And through time, proficiency is the way it is. That's how it happens on there. But that seal is critical on a flute. But very beautiful. Yep. And so guess what you get? The best part of yours is picking someone else now. Do you want to go through the sticky notes, or how do you
yeah, you can go through the sticky note.
Well, I know there's people on the federal agency out here that aren't representing very well. Ian, how about Ian?
Okay.
There you go.
He's ready.
Yes.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill. What a beautiful gift. So similar to Amy, my dad does a lot of woodwork, and so the smell of the flute and just the process of finishing it reminded me a lot of him. And some of our best conversations occur in his shop at home. He has a shop in the basement, and I haven't been back there since the beginning of COVID. And so it was nice to remember those times with him. I was also really interested to see your shop, Bill, in that video. So thank you for putting together the video on just the process of making the flute. I was really curious to see how you did that, and it was neat to see your process and to hear you share the story about learning that from your grandfather. So for my flute, let's see, I need to hold it up. I kept it pretty simple. I love the look of just natural wood. And so I finished mine with butcher block oil. So it's a very light finish and just shows the grain of the wood. And then my particular piece has this beautiful knot up here. So I thought that was just sufficient decoration for this piece. And so I'll try to switch to a different microphone. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear it if I play through my headset. So bear with me a minute here. All right, let's give this a try.
You put a pretty big smile on my face there. That sounds familiar. I can't make sure that sounds.
Bill, I was thinking that was coming from the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yep.
Very good, Ian.
Spaghetti Western fan. And I've also got to tell you.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
My daughters, I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. When they saw this and they heard me playing it in my office at home, they were just drawn to it like a magnet. So I've got to be really careful with this because obviously mine does work in contrast to Marvin's because it drew all the ladies in my household to the room where I was playing it. So thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah, that's
what
totally
a beautiful gift.
So, yes, that was my pleasure. What I'm going to do then, if Ian wants to pick someone, then he can, or I do have the default sticky notes yet too. So.
Oh, go right ahead, Bill. Call out someone else.
Okay, well, you pick 1 through 3.
3.
And 1 through 8.
7.
7 it is. Brian Taylor. Brian on.
Yeah, I'm here. Oop.
Oh.
I knew. Well, I was figuring I was going to get called sooner or later here. So, again, Bill, thank you so much. I was humbled to get something like this, and receiving it in the mail. To me, it was a personal touch because it didn't come in the mail from, Bill Quackenbush THPO of the Ho-Chunk Nation. It came from Bill and Lisa Quackenbush from River Falls. So it really put a personal spin to that for me. What mine reminded me of is summers up on a lake. Some of my fondest memories up north on a lake is being up there late at night, and it's just getting dark. The lake is just like glass. It's so calm, and I hear loons in the background. I can see loons going across the lake and diving for their food. So that's what this reminded me of. And if you can see, I was really afraid to stain it. I really wanted to stain it, but like a lot of people, was worried about, ruining it to some degree, or was going to ruin the quality of the sound. So again, mine was very basic, except I don't know if you can see it. I kind of used your drawing on your instructions, and I made the little folklore accordion flute guy and burned him onto the wood. And then I just kind of took a torch and kind of burnt the wood a little bit. And now that this is done, and I really like to stain it, and this is probably going to be displayed at either the office. Well, actually, it's probably going to be at my DOT office, because I've mentioned this to a lot of people that weren't on as part of this conference, and they're really excited to see it. This is such a cool thing, Bill. I really felt more of a connection with the listening session this time than in previous. So I really appreciate it. And I do not play an instrument, but I will give it my best shot. My wife was getting a kick out of me trying to put a couple notes together here. So I will give it a shot. That worked out so much better when it was in practice than doing it live. But thank you again so much for this gift, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're totally welcome. Yeah, and again, the DOT is the one that really put all this together. out there. And I was just a tool for the DOT to do this as well. I did notice the horns in the background there as well too. So maybe you take your flute out to your deer stand and you can bring in those big bucks with that flute.
Yeah. Maybe I can, maybe I can bring in those doe with playing.
Yes, maybe. That's right. And so do you have anybody that you feel that you should pick on a little bit here?
I think I'm going to pick on Tommy Curran.
All right, there we go. Is he still around?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Take it away.
First, I just want to thank you, Bill. This is such a thoughtful gift. It's so meaningful to receive a handmade gift. I said that in the message yesterday, but not something that I commonly receive is something made by hand, and you can see the craftsmanship you put into this. Like others, the smell of cedar hit me when I opened it, and it reminded me of my parents. My parents have like a stone and cedar house with cedar paneling on the inside, and that rich smell of cedar is something that I associate with them. So I did want to mention, I had a team meeting this morning, and I showed this off at my team meeting and made some of my colleagues a little jealous that they weren't participating in the listening session. It was a cool thing, and I shared the video you actually sent with us with my team on the process you had to make it. So I have some other woodworkers on my team, and they might attempt to make their own flutes as well. I pretty much just stained it, and then I coated it with the oil that you supplied for us. I haven't added any decorations yet. I didn't want to do anything yet, but I might burn something into it going forward. So just a medium brown stain I used for it. I don't know how to play the flute, so I'll just play some notes for you. But the tone on it is beautiful. I'm not sure if that'll come across with the audio here. Let me switch microphones so I'm not using my headset. So again, thank you, Bill. So much appreciated. It's very meaningful to us.
Yeah, right on. And that's great. I'm glad we're able to listen to everybody playing their flutes as well. Everybody needs a big hand of applause, of course. Just receiving it and opening it up, is kind of fun. Sitting around with your family and friends to playing it. I mean, don't be scared to drag that thing out. They're pretty durable during the campfires and so on and so forth, right? They say. That said, I have, believe it or not, just enough room for one person to redeem themselves. Lynn? No, I'm kidding, Lynn. Stacy received the flute, and I'm anxious to hear Stacy, if you want just a few seconds, give us your thoughts.
Yay! Oh my gosh. I received my flute, and I remember Kim saying, "Did you get the flute?" And I was like, "I got the flute." So I was all excited when it came in the mail, and I was like, "Ooh," and I was just looking at it. And then when I heard your story, Bill, I thought really, really honored that you have that connection with your grandfather. Get a little choked up here. And that you're able to share that with me and everybody here. So just a real happy moment for me, and I was excited to tell Kim. I apologize, I didn't go ahead and put anything on there, but at the end of the day yesterday, I took the time and I thought about what would I put on here. So I did start with sketching out something. So I did make an attempt. I don't know if you can see that. So with my thought of what would I put on here, I thought about Iroquois scroll work. And so this is part of our symbols, the semicircle, the sky that represents the sky dome. And then the middle piece is corn, because I was thinking about how my grandmother passed. and me and my brother planted our heirloom Indian corn on her land. So it was a pretty happy moment. So that's where I'm at. And I've been practicing. But what I really like is how you get that really soft sound, that really low. I've been trying to make that noise or that note very hard to do. So I'm gonna try. I can't carry that really soft. It's like it's off in the distance. That's as far as I got.
Well, that was beautiful. So I'm sure everybody's thinking the same. It is very difficult. I'm going to tell you that right now. I've been playing flutes for quite a few years, and it's difficult if you're not accustomed to playing in front of people, because you can practice until you're blue in the face, and then when you want to play that same sound or that same song, never seems like it sounds the same when you're attempting to play it for somebody else. And flutes are that way. And most flautists out there, maybe I'm talking to expert flautists on this line here, but they're more personable. And you take an F sharp flute, for example, this one like Choka had, it starts down into this area, and the A flutes come from this, and the higher ones come farther up. But you'll see that reverberation in you, and you'll feel it there. And in part with your breath coming into there and breathing through that flute there, you become one with that flute. And through time and practice, though, I mean, people can play flute all their lives and still, have something to learn at the far end of life. So, well, thank you. I think I've extended my time, unfortunately. And me and myself, I really appreciate having this opportunity. The cultural exchange, I think, during these conferences are something I look forward to. I always try to attempt to bring something to them, and this being a virtual, and it was a little bit more of a struggle, but I think the DOT is pulling it off. So I appreciate it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Bill. Well, that wraps up our cultural exchange project. Thank you, everybody who signed up and received and shared online your process for looking at your flute and playing your flute and thinking of how you wanted to put designs on it. So thank you for sharing. I did put in the chat, noted that Tina Van Zyl, she canceled for our next presentation. That was scheduled from 1 to 2, and Bill graciously extended his time frame to support the change in the agenda. So just want to send good thoughts out to Tina Van Zyl. She's just feeling a little bit under the weather today. So we were able to have the Wisconsin Historical Society presentation on historical markers. In coordinating with Fitzy, Rebecca, and Janet, they're able to present earlier. So we're moving up the agenda. And just a brief introduction, we have Fitzy Heimdall, the State Historical Markers Program Coordinator. He oversees the Wisconsin State Historical Marker Program through the Wisconsin Historical Society. He oversees and coordinates with the Marker Review Committee to process, review, and place orders for new historical markers. He's currently working to re-envision the State Historical Marker Program and to provide greater representation to the diverse stories and histories of the state of Wisconsin. He also assists with the Speakers Bureau program and the Local History and Historic Preservation Conference. He is going to be joined by Janet Seymour, the Outreach Director from the Wisconsin Historical Society. She is responsible for developing and delivering statewide programming, events, support, resources, and services to further the Wisconsin Historical Society's mission throughout the state. Janet supervises the outreach team and ensures strategic direction and delivery of functions and programs such as the affiliate program, the historical marker program, the Local History and Historic Preservation Conference, the Speakers Bureau, and the Wisconsin Historical Society Board of Curators Awards. And also joining them today is Rebecca Comfort. And Rebecca is the inaugural American Indian Nations liaison. She assumed her position at the Wisconsin Historical Society in April of 2018. She's an enrolled member of the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. Comfort is a tribal relations professional with senior leadership experience, specializing in supporting and strengthening institutional understanding surrounding issues of importance to American Indians. So will you please welcome Fitzy, Janet, and Rebecca. Thank you.
Fitzy is going to start us off today with our presentation. Fitzy, I was just checking to make sure your sound is working okay.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you, Stacy, for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak about Wisconsin's historical markers and giving us the opportunity to chat with all of you at this listening session. I am going to share a brief PowerPoint presentation, but I really wanted this to be an open discussion and dialogue as well. We're here to answer any questions that you might have about the State Historic Marker Program and about our plans on re-envisioning the Markers Program as well. So Wisconsin's Historical Markers Program is a key program of the Outreach Division of the Wisconsin Historical Society. We currently have over 590 official state historical markers that carry approved texts commemorating the sites, the individuals, the places, and the stories all across the state of Wisconsin that make up our regions and our state's rich heritage and history. As you can see, we have them spread out all over the state, and it's a very popular program in terms of the number of people who traveled to these markers. It's a very popular destination, and it's a really great way to look at the history of our state. A brief history of our program. Like many of the historic marker programs, Wisconsin's Historic Marker Program came from local efforts to commemorate important people, places, and events. These were independent efforts to commemorate the histories of their places. And still today, the State Historical Marker Program is completely locally driven as well. That's something that we're very proud of, and it traces its roots to the very beginning of the program. In 1943, the director of the State Historical Society approached the governor about creating a system that would unite the histories of these various communities under a same uniform marker design, which is the tobacco brown and cream raised marker that you see today. The very first marker was dedicated in 1951 up in Peshtigo to commemorate the Peshtigo fire. Today, the program attracts a dedicated following. They travel all across the state to document their travels and experiences. And they certainly let me know if there's a marker that's missing or if there's a marker that needs attention. It's an absolute pleasure to hear and being able to interact with the people of Wisconsin on their voyages as they learn about the state's rich heritage. Last year, for example, we received 85 email inquiries just from March 2020 to March 2021, and a Facebook post from January 2021 about a new historical marker in Kenosha reached 10,453 people and was shared and was engaged with 753 times. This shows just how popular the program is. And on average, we receive and process about 8 to 12 new markers. We're excited that this year we're going to be able to offer even more markers, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. Here is the newest state historical marker that was dedicated. This is the Brussels Cemetery Grotto in Brussels, Wisconsin. So how the application process works, as I said before, it is a completely locally driven effort. Organizations or individuals are encouraged and are invited to apply for a state historical marker. The program is administered by the Office of Programs and Outreach through the Wisconsin Historical Society. As the administrative review, we look at the following aspects for Wisconsin's history, making sure that the topics cover archaeology, architecture, culture, ethnic association, geology, history, legends, or natural history. All of the applicants are driven locally, either from individuals, municipalities, local historical societies, or other agencies. And the Wisconsin Historical Society has regulatory authority over the markers program via state statute. When applicants submit an application, we require the following documentation. Many times they partner with local municipalities or agencies for permission to place the markers in a public right-of-way. One of the requirements for a historic marker is that it needs to be publicly accessible at all times. So if it is going on a private property, there needs to be an easement of the marker so that it will be publicly accessible. The source of funding, we need that markers alone, they are costly. They cost anywhere from a few $100s up to a little over $5,000. And so we try to work with our local communities to raise funds, being able to try to provide them with potential fundraising sources, but that is the responsibility of the applicant themselves. The name of the organization or government entity willing to assume long-term maintenance. Common misperception is that the Wisconsin Historical Society owns the markers. It's actually the individual marker applicant that has ownership and ultimately is responsible for the maintenance of these markers. They also submit their marker text and photocopies with supporting evidence. We review that based on historical accuracy, editorial notes, and we approve the overall narrative text at the end. And then the final step is digital images of the installed marker. This is where we share the dedication through our social media, through our newsletters. We love to hear the word of when new markers go up, and people love hearing about them as well. The review process begins when a pre-application form is submitted by the applicant. This is a simple step that determines whether the marker itself is eligible. We implemented this recently in order to try to make it easier for applicants to know that their topic is clearly applicable and it meets the criteria for a state historical marker. After that, the applicant submits a pre-application fee, which is a new step that will help the program be more self-sufficient and sustainable long-term. We review the text submitted by the applicants, and the final review panel includes members of the State Historic Preservation Officer, Certified Local Government and Preservation Education Coordinator, our Outreach Director, and Regional Outreach Coordinators. Additional review consultation is conducted by our American Indian Nations Liaison and multicultural coordinators as needed for the individual topics. A common question we get is regarding the maintenance of our markers. As I said before, the earliest markers date from 1950s and the 60s. There was a burst of activity originally, and many of the historical markers that date from that era were installed at wayside rest stops along interstate highways, and over time they do show their wear. One of the requirements is that all marker applicants agree to be responsible for the maintenance of their marker in perpetuity. We also are required to get permission on if a marker needs to be moved or relocated. If there's a construction project or if a marker needs to be moved, that's something that we need to approve in advance as well. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes state historical markers are removed. The Wisconsin Historical Society has the authority to request the removal of a state historical marker if the information is found to be incorrect, inappropriate, or offensive. And this has happened. Marker 70, the Bad River, was installed in 1957 and was removed in 2007. It was formerly located on US Highway 2 and was removed at the request of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa with assistance from the DOT. Wisconsin's State Historical Marker Program is a subset of all kinds of different types of markers. There's a distinction between markers that are owned by the DOT, the Historical Society, the DNR. There's also markers that are commemorative for local events and local marker programs. So there certainly are other historical markers out there and other programs as well, but we are the official state historical marker program. Now, we understand that the program does have some deficiencies, and we are working to try to rectify these as well. In 2017, a comprehensive overview of the program was conducted, and we found that through the 590 historical markers in Wisconsin, only 7 described events or people associated with Black history, and only 10 were dedicated to topics related to women's history. And currently, there are no markers describing the contributions of LGBTQ, Latinx, Hmong, or other recent immigrant communities in Wisconsin, which are certainly deserving of their stories being told. There's also objectionable language in many of our older markers. In particular, we've identified 5 markers that contain derogatory or offensive language towards Native American history and people with disabilities, and those will be targeted for replacement and removal in the near future. So re-envisioning the State Historic Markers Program. Key parts in re-envisioning the program is trying to understand who has a story to tell. Who tells the story has a significant impact on what the story is being told. We know that there are cost barriers associated with the state historical marker, and unfortunately at the moment that cost is entirely on the local applicants. We want to look at how can we remove, revise, or expand historically inaccurate and offensive markers through community input and collaboration. That's the key of the Historical Society is input is community and local collaboration. Looking at our currently underrepresented histories of what the marker program portrays, looking at the geographic representation, that first map, you could see that there were some areas that had more dense clusters of historical markers than others. That's something we certainly are looking at. And we are also looking at expanding the interpretation of our markers as well. Native American representation in the state's historic markers program. 113 markers refer to Native American history, although mostly tangibly. 30 markers, state historical markers, were part of the Black Hawk War series. Many of these were most likely created with little to no input, unfortunately, from Native Americans. Our goal is to partner with tribal experts and community members to examine them with us in order to identify any that might be offensive and then work to remove or replace them in the future. As I said before, as part of the re-envisioning of the State Historical Markers Program, the Wisconsin Historical Society was awarded the $75,190 grant through the Pomeroy Foundation to better support historically marginalized communities and to elevate the histories and contributions of these communities. Our goal is for this 3-year program is for the first year to increase our representation of African American history, both through the civil rights era and the March to Milwaukee in Milwaukee, as well as other statewide representative histories. Year 2, we will work with our tribal communities to install 10 new markers that reflect Native American history in Wisconsin. 5 of the markers will be replacements for markers that were created in the 1950s and 1960s that represent offensive, inaccurate, or outdated interpretations. In year 3, we will pivot to broaden our community engagement through a call for marker proposals from specific topics and content areas. We've already identified several areas that are lacking in our current historical marker program, including women's history, Hmong and Latinx history, and other topics. Our goal is to identify 5 to 10 community groups to lead the co-curation of these 10 new markers. And here we have our contacts. We're here, of course, to answer any questions, and we welcome any questions about the marker program moving forward. Janet and Rebecca are also here to give a brief presentation this morning.
Thank you, Fitzy, for that great overview of the markers program. I'm going to just follow up with a couple of thoughts about the next steps for our markers re-envisioning project, and then also invite Rebecca to share any thoughts or comments on what we've been talking about today. And then we're looking forward to your questions and discussion after that. So we just found out about this $75,000 grant from the Pomeroy Foundation just about 2 weeks ago. So as you can imagine, we're really excited to be able to finally get to the work of addressing some of the issues that we've been working on identifying over the past few years. So it's exciting news to be able to move forward with the re-envisioning project and to have the funds in hand that will help support the cost of installing at least 36 new markers across the state. So this really is a 3-year project to help us establish a sustainable model for community engagement with our markers program moving forward. Fitzy talked a lot about wanting to elevate local voices and share diverse stories, and some of the barriers that have existed to that to date. And certainly one of those barriers is the cost of the markers. So, we're thrilled that we received this grant that will help us get started on re-envisioning the program. We understand that it's just a beginning. There's a lot of work to do with a program that, began in the 1950s, and there are over 590 markers statewide. So the 3-year project and the $75,000 is very much a start and a beginning to ongoing work and partnering with communities to do a better job with the state historical markers program. So we'll spend the next 3 years figuring out what the sustainable model is moving forward. We'll be working in Milwaukee, as Fitzy said, working with tribal communities, and then the 3rd year opening up application process or a granting process so that we're encouraging applications from every corner of the state and different communities so that the markers program really has a vibrancy to it that's been lacking in the past. So one of the key aspects that we'll be looking forward to after the 3-year initial program is how to have a sustainable cost sharing program. The cost barrier of installing an official state historical marker, a smaller marker can start at over $1,000 and the larger ones add up to over $5,000. So our vision, our hope is over the next 3 years to build that model and identify additional funding, possibly from this foundation and others, that will allow us to have an ongoing grant or cost sharing program for communities who are interested in developing and installing state historical markers in their communities, but otherwise wouldn't necessarily have the access or ability to fundraise for those markers. So we're excited to take the first steps with this project and give some much needed, long-awaited attention to some of those markers, particularly those that date back into the 1950s and 1960s. So we look forward to working with all of you on this project. And Rebecca, I'll turn things over to you for a few minutes before Q&A.
Thank you, Janet. Bonjour, everyone. Nice to see familiar names and faces. My thoughts on the marker program. This is something that I think has been a really interesting and puzzling conundrum that the society faces for a couple of different reasons, some of which I think were alluded to in Fitzy's wonderful presentation. Fitzy, thank you for sharing that. But particularly, I think of the fact that the markers really are products of the people who created them and the times that they were written. It's not infrequently, especially when I had first started with the society a couple of years ago, that I would be getting a lot of requests from members of non-Native members of communities who are interested in including Native history on markers, but not necessarily doing the research or homework and working with communities directly. I think that there are more emails than I can count that I have shared with Bill Quackenbush over the years, for example, of folks that have been, I think, really eager and interested in trying to work with Native communities to address history that perhaps on the surface they often don't realize can be difficult and becomes controversial. And sort of how to work through, I think, those issues, both with what resources the society has available, but also with regards to the burden and incumbents that seems to be placed on tribal communities when it comes to solving these bigger issues. I think with every problem are good opportunities, particularly with some of the older markers. I know when I was traveling around the state, which hopefully I can resume doing again soon. I've had one work trip since COVID, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully we'll be making the rounds and seeing folks sooner rather than later. But especially when I had first started traveling, I think back in 2015, and I was working with the School of Ed at UW at this time, I made a point to stop at all of the historic markers whenever I would pass one. And I learned to brace myself according to what year the marker was erected. So anytime I would see something in the 50s or 60s, I would be holding my breath and hoping that it wasn't as bad as I thought that it probably would be. But with that, I think there are good opportunities, good questions to be asking about how do we re-envision problematic markers. And I think in particular as well about something I heard, I think I saw this on Facebook the other day, instead of the society trying to represent the voice of communities, that sometimes we need to really learn how to pass the mic, and passing the mic in a way that is really relinquishing authority, especially over some of the more problematic markers, and having those conversations with communities, re-envisioning that history and how we tell it so that we can learn and I think be better prepared in how we sort of address or wrestle with these issues in the future. So with that, I think, Janet, questions? I'll turn it back to Janet and Fitzy.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, happy to answer questions. follow up with more detail on anything that we've mentioned today.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Bill Quackenbush. First, it's great to hear there's some funding just around the corner that's able to be utilized on there. It sounded like a lot, but in reality, over a 3-year period, it's probably not going to be much, is it? So I'd be interested to see all the different options down the line for assisting in the funding process as well. Where would you venture into? Private businesses or communities? And the reason I ask is that money is always short all over the place, but there also, in order to justify the funding, we need to create the need there, or at least we have the need, or make sure that it's justifiable when you request for that funding in other places as well. There are some preservation grants out there. Have you begun to explore with that at all? I mean, in part, I know it's the perpetuation of history, but then there's some perpetuation components to the process as well.
Sure. Yeah, so thanks, Bill. One of the components of the 3-year planning project is to have these conversations in different communities and regions around the state to help identify different potential funding sources to create like a resource guide and a listing of potential fundraising or sponsors, foundations for communities to apply for funding for these markers. Because I think there are some regional differences, and it'd be really helpful just to get input from different folks around the state and different regions to help identify potential funders. You're right. It's like $75,000 seems like a nice chunk to start with, but that adds up to just about like 30 to 40 markers over 3 years. So that's definitely at the forefront of my mind, is how to create a sustainable grant or cost sharing program moving forward. It's really interesting. The Pomeroy Foundation has a specific interest. They fund 2 areas. One is historical markers, and the other is organ transplant research. These are the 2 passions of the Pomeroy family. And so we do know that they're interested in funding a longer term program for the state markers program, and they're funding other state marker programs as well. So we will definitely keep that in front of our mind as we plan the next 3 years and look for opportunities. I think that there are, Dinah Pincunas and other SHPO staff will be part of this project, and we'll be talking more about possibilities for including markers more frequently as part of mitigation process for projects. We've done a handful of those, but not so many recently. So I do think that there's some potential, like you suggested, that are more specific to preservation grants or mitigation work in particular. And now I'm making some notes. Thank you, Bill.
Hi, this is Katie Kalashewski from WisDOT Cultural Resources team. My question's pretty easy, but if I shoot you guys an email, will you be able to easily tell me all of the markers that are technically DOT owned?
We could look that up.
Okay, great. I know we have at least one.
Yeah. Our records, some of the earlier records for the markers don't necessarily have the applicants, but we have quite a few that do. So we could certainly send you that list.
Yes, that would be great. I get questions about markers quite a bit from project teams. So knowing which ones we actually own, and 2, if any of them are problematic, will I think, help us in the future.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for our presenters? I do know that this is being recorded and we have your contact information if there's any additional questions afterwards. And I appreciate you coming on, taking the time to give us this information. Fitzy, Janet, and Rebecca. It's pretty interesting to know that perpetuity, it's up to the applicant to maintain those areas, those historical markers. I know that there's one on our reservation and I was wondering who takes care of that one?
Right. Yeah. If anyone has any questions about ownership or marker status or maintenance, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call too, and I can help look up that information.
Okay. I have your contact information. Thank you.
You bet.
Hey,
Thank you so much.
Stacy, I have one more question then.
Oh, Bill's got a question. Hang on.
Yeah, I apologize. It's interesting because I just got in my mind, I just assume that these roadside markers are along roadsides, but if they are taken care of by those requesting for it and receiving it, do they have to be along the right of way of a road, or can they be any place they end up being?
There is, so typically they're in the, public right of way and required to be in a location that's publicly accessible. But as you mentioned, a lot of them are not exactly on roadsides or at waysides. They're at other locations. So there is, we do have the ability to, a private property owner can give permission to place the marker there if they give permission to have that location, that marker be publicly accessible. So it's certainly much more flexible in terms of potential locations than just along like roadsides or wayside markers.
Many of them would be placed in like a municipal or city park. We've had some recent applicants working with the county to put the historical marker on a county park as well. So there's a lot of different, of course, interagency cooperation and partnerships that go into submitting an application for a historical marker.
I see there's one more question in the chat. Has there been anything in place temporarily at the places that refer to natives negatively? Not that I'm aware of, although if Rebecca or Fitzy, if you have examples or others on the call, I'd be happy to hear those examples. I guess the one example that we have is the Bad River marker, where we worked with Bad River and the DOT to remove that marker. And in other locations, what we've been doing the last couple of years is determining sort of what markers are the most pressing issue in terms of needing to be removed or recreate a new marker. And we've started working with the current owners or communities for those markers, and we'll be just launching that work over the next couple of months. So as far as I know, there hasn't been like temporary signage. There's been a lot of sort of internal discussions or emails, communications with different communities, but nothing that's been publicly put in place at those particular markers. Rebecca?
So I think the case of the Bad River marker along US 2 is the most egregious. And that was before I was with the society, but Janet, you were here. And in that case, the society, so the marker was removed, and Fitzy had in his presentation an image of the marker was destroyed following its removal. The other markers, I think they exist on a spectrum of, how problematic is this marker? Granted, any that are problematic certainly aren't great by any means. And I think in the case of Bad River, it was a good example where when they are identified of being so egregiously problematic that, in this case, the society was able to remove it. But my experience sort of learning what content is on the rest of the markers and beginning to flag them, Janet kind of spoke to the process that's involved in that, which is very much, first identifying the content that's problematic, then identifying who the original marker applicant is or was, and whether or not that applicant is still around. If it's, in some cases, historical organizations that may, I don't know if I know of any examples of historical societies that are no longer around, but identifying who the owner of the marker is, and then starting those conversations about how to address it. So we're sort of still in that very, very initial stage of like, yes, we flagged them. We have been identifying owners for the couple that I've sort of been in conversational exchanges about in the last year and a half or so. And then the next process is really, I think, what Janet was talking about, Janet and Fitzy with the Pomeroy Foundation, and having opportunities now to make those determinations on what's most appropriate.
Oh, and Kelly has a good question. If the applicant no longer exists, if the organization has disbanded, would the maintenance responsibility revert to the Wisconsin Historical Society? It's a good question, Kelly, and one that we kind of try to figure out on a case-by-case basis. It's not specifically clear, like in state statute, but in practice, the responsibility does revert back to the Wisconsin Historical Society. One thing that Fitzy's been working on the last year is matching up orphaned markers, as we refer to them, with potential new caretakers. So we had a marker in Appleton where the original applicant was no longer in existence. And so we have partnered with the local historical society for them to take over the care and maintenance of that marker. And like we're able to help facilitate a transfer of ownership in some cases, but it's something that we're weeding through, like the 590. Many of them need some maintenance, some paint, some care. And so Fitzy's been working hard to match up some of those markers with potential new caretakers. And we're trying to build up some funding for maintenance of them as well, so that we have a little funding available to help people with that cost. These are great questions. Thank you again, Stacy, for the invitation, and to all of you for listening and asking questions today. It's been great to be here.
Great presentation. Thank you.
This is Mike Larange. I have a question, and I apologize. You may have addressed this in your presentation, but I had to mute you because I had a phone call I had to take. So that's my fault if I missed it.
Oh, that's okay.
Is there a place where I can go to find out who owns a historic marker? We have one that's right near the main tribal campus up in Forest County. It's at a DOT turnout, so I'm assuming it might be DOT, but I'm just wondering, since there's going to be road work through there.
We have a database. A lot of the markers have data on the original applications. Not all of them do. So I would say the best way it would be to reach out to me with the specific marker, and I can look that up for you and see if we have any info on the ownership of it.
Perfect. Thank you.
I see there's one final comment from Kelly again. Sometimes faux, like we have people who try to pass off fake state historical markers. You never know with people, I guess. So sometimes people will look for a less expensive marker option, and will ask like a local sign company to make a similar looking state official marker. It doesn't happen very often, but I guess, twice over the past 15 years, I've had to track down a rogue marker and have it removed. Sometimes people will avoid the official process because there is a very thorough review of fact checking and editing. And so sometimes if people are wishing to avoid that type of process and oversight from the State Historical Society, they will try to find another way to create a similar looking official marker. So if you see something that doesn't seem quite right or seems a little off, it is, yes, very helpful to send Fitzy an email or to call about it so that we're aware. Like I said, it doesn't happen very often. It's only been, I think, twice that we've had to go track something down and make sure it got taken down. But it does happen from time to time. So.
Yeah, the situation I was thinking of was also a surprise to DOT because it showed up in DOT right away. And they hadn't authorized it either, but it was derogatory toward Asians. And it was related to World War II.
It was, yes. That was one of the 2 or 3 that I have knowledge of. So that was a real doozy. Yes, a surprise to many agencies apparently. So.
On our website, we do have an interactive map of all of the state official markers as well as a PDF list. So that's a great way just to check to make sure it is a official state historical markers. If it's on the list and if it's on the map, then it is. And we update that regularly as new markers are installed or if any of them are taken down or missing. So we do keep that up to date.
I think this will mark the end of the presentation then. And again, thank you. Thank you for presenting today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're moving on to the next part of the agenda. With moving everything up due to the cancellation, we're going to have the closing remarks from Marvin Defoe. We'll do a break. And then with the TPOs and the WisDOT DOT staff, we're going to have a scheduled meeting after the break.
Yeah, bonjour. Marvin Defoe here. Sorry that Tina couldn't make it, and I wish her the best. But before I give the thought to the closing, I was wondering if there was anyone participating who may have some thoughts. I just kind of want to open it up for about 5 minutes or so. If anybody has any final thoughts to share with everybody, the floor would be open to you. So if there's anybody who wants to say something to the group in closing, just unmute yourself and no, sounds like nobody wants to, but that's fine. Ready to take the break, ain't you? But I'm not going to be too long. And the reason why I call on you to the closing thoughts, if you'd like to say something, because this is all on all of us. And what I request is if you take a moment, I just want to have a moment to reflect and just go back and think of some of the things that we may have learned or heard, or maybe some of the things we kind of inspired wanting to do now. Just take a few moments here and reflect on the 2-day conference that we participated in. Take something with you. put it in your mind and put it in your heart and take it with you from these 2 days. So I'm gonna give everybody a moment. Miigwech. And my last thought, I wanted to share with everyone. Reason why we're not in person certainly is because of COVID. Certainly because of the sickness that is traveling around the world, and that's why we ain't in person. But you know, we may know of some friends, some elders, some individuals who may have passed away because of COVID. I know of some. And I think moving forward, I think all of us is, my dad, he used to talk about when he was a kid. He said, it ain't like that no more today. I said, well, what ain't like that? Neighbors helping neighbors out, helping each other out, you know. And my dad, my dad said, love, Zagi Awin, will always come ahead over hate. It'll always come out in the end. And he used to say, um, uh, being compassionate, using your compassion, um, will always take the lead. Take the lead of compassion, being kind to each other, helping each other out. Picking up somebody who may be down, or if somebody's doing a good job, pat them on the back. You know, pat them on the back. So I just kind of wanted to leave with that, what we're all faced with. It really doesn't matter if you got brown skin, purple skin, white skin, green skin, or what have you. What we're faced with, and I really believe that, and that compassion and being careful for each other is going to pull us out of this. So I just wanted to leave that last part, the last part for everybody, for the closing. I'm very glad to participate in this conference and thank for all the organizers. Of course, it's not ending. We're still going to go some more planning with it, but I want to give shout out to Stacy, Stacy and the other ones that everyone else that helped kind of keep everybody on focus, keep calling our meetings, and thank you, Stacy. You did a good job. I appreciate it. So with that, I'd say miigwech to everybody. Me you. And me you means in our language means that's all, folks.
Thank you, Marvin, Yonko. Well, this marks the end of the day. And for those TPOs that are online and DOT staff, we'll take a 15-minute break. Thank you for everybody who presented, prepared for today, and for those who participated, showed up. Thank you for joining us.